companies are interested in supporting Steve.
There are over 7.6 billion centers in this world, each and every one of us. We are the race of alert creatures, pioneering to question and to explore incredible things waiting to be known. This is the human spirit spontaneously revealed through our cosmic curiosity, creativity, admiration, risk, trial, failure, success, and our belief in ourselves. In this world of varying opportunities, the World Congress on Information Technology aims to dissolve boundaries and unite those able to seize the opportunity, to develop new possibilities, explore new ideas, markets, and cultures, build new partnerships, and mend old bridges. Our focus is not on technology, but on how technology will continue to affect people. Our goal is not to innovate the known, but to research the unknown. Our purpose is not to find the center, but to prove that anyone, anywhere, can be the center. We are at the forefront of a whole new world, created by restless minds. There are over 7.6 billion centers in this world. Each and every one of us. And here, commanding the attention of the rest.
that will drive an existing multinational out of business and erode the national tax base. Uberization is taking over economy and disrupting traditional sectors and companies. Digital platforms are accumulating big data and taking command heights in the economy. Transnational digital peer-to-peer transactions are not visible to regulators and tax administrations. Professional jobs are lost to artificial intelligence and office bots. New e-payment systems offer better and easier access to financial services. A growing share of financial flows bypasses traditional banking systems, with many of these movements happening in the shadows. Cryptocurrencies are challenging the role of central banks. What will happen next? Are regulators prepared to cope with challenges of digital transformation? Governments will need to transform into digital service providers and implement digital ecosystems supporting platforms. Tax administrations are natural leaders in this transformation process, and this is where we are going.
So, basically, the new digital economy is concentrating around digital platforms, and they are coordinating market players in the real time. This is a new shared and gig economy. New business models are disrupting existing businesses, pushing goods and services out of markets and destroying jobs, bring company closure, collect client data, analyze personal data, and often accomplished by the invisible financial flows. All this appears to be highly damaging, but consumers love it. And growing demand for digital services ensures digital disruptors, capital growth. Digital business do not have any significant material assets, almost do not create new jobs, might be located anywhere in the world and pay little attention to governments and regulators at all. They push aside regulators and introduce their own rules, their own ecosystems. When we think about digital transformation, the first thing which comes to our mind is the disruptive technologies. We always say the iOS, Internet of Things, new biometric things, digital identity, but however, digital transformation is not just about the new technologies. It is about the new organizational charts. It's bringing new skills and competence, changing the internal culture, introducing new business models and processes, and introducing digital-friendly legislation and regulation, as well as the managing legacy issues. Digital transformation is disrupting all aspects of our lives. Everything gets digitized. Every device is connected and turned into a data source. This creates pressure on the very existence of the governments as we know them traditionally. This is the new reality. And in the digital world, national borders are not obstacle for business transactions, finance and workplace. It is becoming increasingly difficult for jurisdictions to trace international value creation chains. BEPS, the base erosion of profit shifting, is most important issue on G20 conferences. Tax administrations find themselves in the middle of these changes. We see these challenges earlier than most of the other regulators. And our existing solutions, but I don't want to talk too much tax today, but our existing solutions, I will name maybe 3 of them. It's VAT control system, value-added tax automatic control system, the online cash register system, and the special cooperative compliance system, which allows the big companies to open their accounts to the tax in exchange of the ruling, but not field audits at all. This is kind of the answers to this. And combined use of different disruptive technologies provide synergies that yield best results and allow us to keep up with the fast-changing world. Richard asked me before when we was talking in the hall about is it right that the digital transformation efforts help us a lot to get results. So this is the data. We have been able to ensure the growth of the tax revenue on the background of the flat economy. If we take the average growth for 5 years of GDP of Russia, it's 2.4%. And the tax collection was 88%. Not raising the rates. This is important, not raising the basic rates. So, in the digital world, governments and regulators will have to acquire a new role, which was also said in the movie, in the film. Governments will have to become providers of digital platforms where people and businesses will enroll, interact, and make transactions. And digitization allows creation of a digital twin of any individual or company and modeling their compliance behavior. It also allows to develop proactive taxpayer services based on real-time data and received from the third-party sources. In the future, there will be no need to file tax returns anymore. In Russia, we will be able to do the first step on that in the next year. So automatic access and withhold taxes, and this system we are planning to launch from the 1st of January. I think that all people want to be compliant. So it is the job of the governments to ensure that the easy compliance tools are ready, available for the people and business. And I would like to show you another short film demonstration, our application solution for self-employed people, individuals, which is the pilot of the future tax administration. Please, but switch on the sound before you start the movie, please.
The tax administrations have long been challenged with taking the incomes of self-employed individuals out of the gray. The FTS of Russia is introducing the next generation of tax administration, where all interaction with taxpayers is done digitally, end-to-end. The innovative approaches embedded in the app-based solution are changing perception of the tax administration. Since January 1st, 2019, the Federal Tax Service of Russia has launched the new pilot project aimed at resolving the issue of capturing the shadow income of self-employed individuals. A simple app pulls together a range of powerful digital technologies, enabling this amazing breakthrough in tax administration. A person can start doing business as soon as this thought gets into his or her mind. Now all a person needs to do is use the app to go through a registration process. As soon as the person is identified by the system, he or she are set to do business and make tax payments. The app records every transaction. The app can immediately generate an invoice and send it to a buyer. There is no need for a self-employed person to have a cash register anymore. It automatically logs every transaction and calculates the amount of tax payable each month. There is no more need to file tax returns. The app allows controlling income received by taxpayers from their collaboration with sharing economy platforms. Tax payments can be done in a traditional way with an invoice or set to be deducted automatically from a credit card linked to the app. Paying taxes has never been easier. Contactless transaction-based taxation becoming a reality.
We launched this application in January of this year, and absolutely voluntarily, more than 210,000 people registered and enroll this and using this actively. And new taxpayer journey begins with a simple and quick interactive online registration. It serves as an entryway to the platform where they find their peers. Inhabitants of taxpayer ecosystem will no longer need to file any reports, including tax returns. And tax authorities will achieve total automation of tax processes absolutely seamlessly, embedding them into taxpayers' natural system. At this point in the time, I think it's highly likely that Richard might be concerned about what tax administration will become Big Brother, we talk. Watching after everything and everybody. We have the last 1 minute, very short film which might maybe, get some answers. Please, but please, switch on the sound.
Many people live in fear that new technologies, artificial intelligence, and digitization will give the tax authorities the ultimate power to fully control our income and expenses. You can't negotiate with an electronic tax system. Panic is taking hold. We are all in danger. The AI takeover is coming. If the machines can run our homes, make our goods, and defeat us in chess, just think what else they could do. Chatbots can worm important information out of us to share with the tax authorities. Richard! Robots observe us in parking lots and stores. They recognize faces, voices, and receipts, only to send all of this to the tax system. By the way, Richard, did you notice the coffee machine watching you today in the hallway of the Yerevan Hotel? It's only the beginning. Tomorrow, a water cooler and a vacuum cleaner will share a detailed account of your life. Want to know what will be next? They will replace us entirely. They will do all the work. They will even trust us to like a post on social media ourselves. What's more, they will take all of the best from you, Big Ben, and even your salary. Not to mention lavash, kebab, and cognac from Armenians. We will live under a bridge, all of us. And there's not enough space under the bridge for everyone. If you don't want to fall victim to artificial intelligence, follow the few simple instructions. Throw out the computer. Switch back to a quill and abacus. Fight the tech power. Become closer to nature. Carve your next iPhone from oak. Wear a foil cap. Perhaps even a cloak. Why not look stylish when you revolt against technology? And most importantly, trust no one except for us, the Federal Tax Service of Russia. We help everyone and simplify everything. We are good. Everything else, bad.
This message was brought to you by artificial intelligence.
I'm watching you.
Thank you for your attention.
But it's joke. Ladies and gentlemen, it's joke. It's not true.
Many people live in fear
No.
that new technologies, artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So between the servicing and the fiscal part, Russian Federal Tax Service is choosing the servicing part of tax administration. We want to be in the ecosystem of taxpayer and help. We are good. And I'm watching from the hall. Thank you. Thank you, Richard, very much. Yes, we will make sure. Okay. All rights reserved.
I think I speak for everybody in here that I've never seen a taxman speak in such plain language or with such a good sense of humor. I assure you, HMRC and the IRS are not equally user-friendly. Oh, hang on, I'll audit my taxes. Oh, panel! Now, let's get to grips with this after that. The role, what I thought what I thought was particularly good in the presentation was the way in which the tax authorities in Russia, like them or loathe them, are getting to grips in a reality that they have to deal with tax and deal with these issues.
Yeah, that's true. And it's very impressive that Russian tax authority is so advanced. And now you all know why Richard asked us to wear red, just to pay attention to Russia more. It's one of the best colors for Russia. I think that the new technology and the regulation, particularly in taxation, is a sort of joint venture. And I really like that our government is not only trying to regulate it, or the governments of different states, but also to employ it for the benefit of the society. And I'm keen to hear the thoughts of others, how they see this joint venture.
Oh, don't worry, you'll hear the thoughts of others. Olga, let's talk on this question of regulation versus law versus... We're going to start off with the public and private sector element of this. Where do you see the distinction between what should be...
I never thought that following this... Private and public divide. I think we increasingly see that divide is being erased. So, for example, if you look at so-called technologies that are disruptive, like blockchain, for example, you see governments lead innovation, And so the description of the tax authorities to trying to collect more tax is one example, but you see governments like, for example, Philippines, to help their citizens, they use blockchain innovation to facilitate payments. And so increasingly you see innovation for the first time in history to be led by governments.
Really?
Yes, you seem skeptical.
Where do you see the distinction, Axel, between government's role and the private sectors?
I'm very much tempted to jump back 35 years or so to the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, if you remember that, so late 80s, when we were hooking up computers in the sort of semi-legally maybe in the cellar of the university, just for the greater good of mankind. We were the good guys, and it was great to know that we were the good guys, and then there are the other guys. That we have seen gray over considerably over the last 20 years or so. We've seen the old World Summit on Information Society and great interest from the governments and regulators, and lately the law enforcers too, who come to we are the good guys, right? To our community of bottom-up industry, self-regulatory people, administering the distribution of IP address space. And the police force comes and says, hey, we want to use your database. And our people, the techies say, that was made for you. So what I see now is a very strong chance for breakage here between the community of bottom-up self-regulatory and the top-down regulatory regime that is more...
Hang on.
Go on.
Sorry, and you might want to bring the microphone a little bit closer. The bottom-up self-regulatory versus the top-down government regulatory. But there are surely very different rights and responsibilities. One side of that equation is entrusted by the public to deal with that.
Absolutely, you're right. And we have a track record of doing things well, so the internet grows. But the challenge to us now is to see that there is governments and regulators and law enforcement, and we need to come together. And in Armenia, they have the Internet Governance Council, or a new thing, where government and members of parliament and industry and ourselves, we come together and talk it over, just so that we understand better what each other means by words, right?
Better understand.
Well, one of the things that really strikes you when you look at these issues is it's regulation, but without the borders that we used to have. So that wonderful presentation from Russia, that's one country out of 160, 170. The world of digital goes way beyond borders. So if we're going to start regulating the digital world, how do you do that in that very different environment? So if you take tax, tax had a massive program led by the OECD to try and bring some harmonization. And when it came to digital, it really struggled, and it's still struggling with it today.
Isn't that struggle inevitable?
So, if this is a tangent, do stop me. But so, because it was mentioned, the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, it's a really interesting document. And if I encourage all of you to do a little bit of reading about the history of the internet, because that document, the original dream of the internet, the Silicon Valley dream, was if only we could keep government out, everything would be just fine. If we left this to the private sector, the internet would run itself. And you read that through all of the rhetoric in the early 80s and 90s, and lo and behold, that's established the conditions for all the problems that we are now trying to deal with now. So that laissez-faire, hands-off approach just never worked.
You would have preferred a regulated internet?
I prefer people putting forethought into things and creating rules that, incentivize innovation and growth responsibly, as opposed to just doing nothing.
So there's a good book called Code as Law.
Do speak up, please.
Well, it's Mike. Code of Law, the book written by Professor Lessig, taking on the issue of whether or not, in the lack of regulation, whether or not there are laws. And in the systems, in the platforms, there will be laws that will dictate outcome. And I think what you're going toward is, if the building is not done intentionally, and if we're not predicting the future as we're building, we may end up living in the world that is not exactly pleasant and not exactly where we want to be, especially when the government takes this laissez-faire kind of approach.
I think Francesca made a very good point that we still will live in the world where we have a lot of different law systems and different regulations. So some countries picked up the real great developments and developed well.
But hang on. But before you go too far down that road, that has been the situation since the year dot. I mean, since individual countries came into being, there has been a different...
Laws by definition are geographical creations. They are within a border.
Right. And the unique part, I'm sure when the Dutch ships first sailed, there was the question of which contracts would be used.
Absolutely. Several hundreds years ago, nobody knew that there is a corporation or company. It didn't exist. They were entrepreneurs, but the governments thought about how to develop the business because people simply went bankrupt and lost everything if they did something wrong in one contract. So there was a fiction developed. We created a corporation, a company, which helped to separate the assets of an individual from the assets of the company. It drove the business dramatically. And I think that we should look at similar developments in the digital sphere as well. Like the government and the lawmakers may sometime make a great step into the new world with the new players helping the digitalizations, helping the digital economy to develop. And GDPR, for example, is one of the examples where 28 countries came together and decided that this should change.
Well, not quite. It wasn't quite as straightforward. I mean, the 28 countries were all part of a single union that was led by a commission and a council that gave birth to this. So it wasn't like it was a negotiation across 28 countries. I mean, underneath, perhaps.
The negotiations were before the European Union was created.
But isn't GDPR, sir, isn't GDPR an example of the largest in the room got there first, imposed their standards, and everybody else follows?
Certainly looks like that. Now, we were all dumbfounded when that happened. Extraterritorialism was something new that we saw there. And I got a lot of reverberation through the internet community about what are they doing? Why do I'm not even there, right? And I'm not even there. So yeah, we do see these things, and the question is what are the next births bringing forward? We cover 76 countries.
But were you surprised, Francesca, were you surprised at the speed with which GDPR was accepted by companies, many of whom don't even do business in the European Union?
I think the pace of that was extraordinary for that kind of regulation. But it is all about speed and pace today, because part of our issue is that regulation is so slow. It doesn't really reflect the world that we live in. So there's probably a number of interesting things that GDPR has shown. One, if you impose strong enough sanctions, people tend to listen. And also, suddenly there was a framework where previously there hadn't been, and people wanted that protection of their privacy. So it probably speaks to a new way of regulating that isn't always going to look like GDPR, but does reflect this need to act quick and to offer solutions to real problems.
So I'm not sure that slow regulators is a problem, because I think few things are more dangerous than uninformed, uneducated regulators. Those are probably actually the most dangerous weapons. I would rather the legislators, regulators learn the technology and understand the implications.
Are you suggesting?
And let me finish.
Yeah.
And I would also rather regulators and legislators not regulate the technologies, but write larger principles to which technology may adapt. And when technology develops and evolves, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to step back and write an overarching future-forward legislation. It's a little bit easier to do it when you give an opportunity to technology to develop and to unfold and to see where it's going. So I'm not. It gets a little bit more difficult in the context of consumer regulations, because you obviously would like not to have your consumers to be taken advantage of and lose money or privacy or be jeopardized physically. However, I do think that uneducated regulators are the most dangerous weapons.
Are you suggesting that most of the regulators are either ill-informed or uneducated on the things that they are regulating on in this industry?
I think I will answer by giving you an example of, remember when Mr. Zuckerberg testified in the United States Congress? Mm-hmm. And remember how many times the members of United States legislature asked Mr. Zuckerberg how Facebook worked? And remember how repeatedly they could not understand how Facebook worked. And I have to say, that worries me, because I think that Facebook is a relatively simple business. And the enlightened members of United States Congress really struggle to understand how that business model works and what technology does.
I wholly agree with that point. I mean, sometimes when we talk about law lagging behind technology, there's this tortoise and the hare type metaphor. Law is supposed to be slow. I mean, we can argue about definitions of what law is, what a legal system is, but one of the things I think we can agree on what it does is it provides stability for how we grow as a society, and that we don't, all of these terms that we're applying to technology, fast, reactive, reflexive, this is all tech speak. Our government is not supposed to work like our technology. We want our governments to be robust, to be resilient, to not be blown asunder by all the winds of change, because that's how we stabilize expectations.
The concept of legislate considered legislation rather than legislate in haste, repent at leisure.
Well, and more importantly, what you see increasingly, governments creating sandboxes. Sandboxes, where they can learn. So, for example, you see various securities regulation authorities all over the world, when they look at blockchain and cryptocurrencies, instead of coming and saying, we know this technology, when they don't, because nobody does, what they say, you, the industry, we're going to create a safe space for you to innovate, and you keep us informed, and we'll work with you and learn with you, so we can regulate in a way that makes sense.
Do you approve of that or not?
Well, I think open mind is a good way for government to come to the game of regulation, for sure.
Well,
I think there's many ways to get to the same outcome here, because if you've got a situation where you have to act fast, you can't wait for law to catch up with the technology, then you look at the end game. So say, for example, with drones, you may take a view that there's a real threat to people's privacy. So your end game is you come up with a principle that says that you're going to make sure that people's privacy, say, is protected by drones, and you work out the detail in time. Or you go a regulatory sandbox route for other types of collaborative regulation, or there's other ways that you manage the risk. But if you're going to go just a single path to how you regulate, you're back into the old trap of only one way to do it.
Sure, but assuming that there are multiple avenues, in the old days, you waited for a societal consensus, which came about because of custom and practice, and ultimately letters in the newspaper, which then awoke legislatures who thought, I ought to do something about this. You can't do that these days, can you?
Well, I think the main problem here is that we are looking at a global scale here, where consensus is not that easy.
No, before you even get to that consensus bit, I'll come to consensus in a minute. I'm talking about the mere speed of this.
Well, that's why, remember I said you increasingly see governments actually innovate. I know you doubted that premise, but that is increasingly where we're going. And you see governments innovate to help their citizens, to collect taxes. Innovative government sounds like an oxymoron at this time, but that attitude has to change.
Yeah, but I think that here, in terms of what government can do, there are a lot of things which really affect the decisions immediately. You rightly said, it's about the speed. Look at the speed things are happening. How many fake emails we're facing? How many cybersecurity attacks? What shall we do? Do we want to live in the world where all our data is really stored somewhere and looked at? Or do we want the regulator to tell us how to exactly handle it? So I think that we shouldn't wait too long for a consensus. Some countries are more speedy and some countries follow the examples. If you look at Armenia, I think it's a country which just by size and the experience of other jurisdictions can really truly benefit a lot from getting the best practices from other legislations, other jurisdictions.
Right, but that if the technology train from the people in this room is hurtling down the tracks,
right,
and the regulators and those responsible, let's just get rid of regulators because it does sort of sound like a man with a cap and everything. Those responsible for ensuring the safety of the system can't keep up. Do we agree? They can't keep up.
I'm really glad you brought up trains.
Oh.
Trains are actually a really interesting example because if you look at discussions about regulation of trains when in that last industrial revolution, one thing we know about technology is that it can lock in certain paradigms. An example being the width of railroad track. So the initial conditions of a technology can determine how that technology diffuses, such that to this day we still use the standard width of railroad track that was used back in the 1800s. So how we establish the initial conditions for technology to develop have knock-on effects that are intergenerational.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm wanting to understand from you all is what's your preference? This thing is moving fast. Now the Europeans, I mean, we're talking about 10, 15 years that this thing has exploded. In that time, GDPR's just come up. The federal authorities in the United States have come up with a whole variety of things that they're looking at. Which has to come first, the chicken or the egg? Either of you? Any of you?
So any physicist would tell you that's the wrong question to ask.
Sorry?
That the chicken and the egg question, the answer to that question is that both were created at the same time. So it's not really about what comes first. I think that again, maybe my handicap here is I'm Canadian and I'm just used to, I've never had reason to think my government was terrible. But I do believe that if we have faith in institutions, political or legal, we have to be able to come to some sort of individual consensus as a country to make sure that technologies develop in a way that reflect our values, and trying to find global consensus, we'll be waiting a long time.
Francesca had a good point. You can't have one approach to everything. Some things are inherently more dangerous and maybe you need government to be a little bit more active. Some things are less so. Some things have technological limitations. So you can't have a same solution to everything.
But how do you avoid what we heard about in the first panel this morning, which is corporations with ulterior motives, or anybody with ulterior motives, bamboozling the system, so that by the time you realize there's a really serious problem, it's too late to do anything about it.
Well, it's never too late to solve problems.
Yeah, I think it's really about chicken and the egg, and I think it's really good that we're talking about these themes. When the technology develops, the legislator would react. Look at what is happening on genetics, genetically modified products. Shall we leave it just to the industry to develop them without any further regulation? Shall we impose more pressure on regulation? And think about one important thing. How is the legislative process organized in many countries? It's a lengthy process with a lot of decision makers. If we employ technology to speed it up, even this will help us to take decisions much quicker. And we saw it in the Russian tax authority. They already did that in certain ways. In certain ways.
I'm sure the Russian tax authority is also extremely concerned about cryptocurrencies. Can we just talk about those for a second? Because this is one classic example where your regulatory sandbox is being tested, but with huge trepidation, because the effects of getting this one wrong could mean monetary policy doesn't work, central banks lose control over it, and the incidence of money laundering. What would you do on the cryptocurrency front?
If I were the government?
Yeah. Well, no, from either side, as you look at the issue, what needs to be done?
Well, you know, that's a really big question. A lot of things need to be done. You don't need to do everything that needs to be done. You only need to do 20% to have 80% of the impact, usually. I think the approach of educating yourself where this is going, will the impact be confined only to financial industry? I think the answer is likely not. Or will it go to other industries, and how to do it best? You know, we talk about risks. You know, to be alive is to risk. Every time you cross a road, you're risking your life. Does that stop you from crossing a road? No. That's why you put a traffic light. Perhaps if you're really risk averse, maybe you build a bridge over the road, right? So that is the way to do it. See how dangerous this road is, and then decide, will you just put the few marks? Will you put the traffic light? Or will you put the overpass? Or will you dig underground? You have many options to do it, and seeing where this is going with an open mind and being part of the industry, I think, is definitely a good approach.
What would you, Axel, would you stop Libra before it gets started until you've established whether you need a zebra crossing, an overpass?
Well, I can tell you, so I've spent some time on the Capitol Hill educating members of the United States Congress about blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And, you know, it's a little bit difficult for members of the United States Congress to separate Libra from Facebook. You know, Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, testified a few years ago, and that was by all accounts a train wreck. And members of the Congress have a memory of that. And frankly, what Facebook has done to the United States is really, you know, with the fake news and alleged affections on the election, Facebook really has PR problem. They really, you know, should think twice before they do cryptocurrency, because.
So would the panel allow Libra to continue?
I ain't buying it.
Sorry?
I ain't buying it.
Would you allow Libra?
There's so much more information needed before you'd go and hit the button and say yes. But there is a piece there, which is to your point around risk management. That's a classic risk management regulation situation. What's your real problem? What are you trying to stop? What don't you know? And what might you never know until you've actually started doing it? And that framework for those kinds of situations is completely different from a more traditional regulatory approach.
That's moving much faster as well at the same time. Would you, Axel, would you allow Libra?
I would follow your guide and say we need to look at it much further. Yes, let's play with it. Who are we to stop it? But we can certainly look at it very carefully, see what it threatens to do.
I want to talk, about having dealt with the different aspects of speed. You've all rightly guided me to the question of transnational, different standards. Whose standards do we use? Now, GDPR came about, and it seems as if that is now the gold standard that everybody's following. But how do we determine whose standards?
Well, just to clarify, GDPR is still a legislation which, as a best practice, affects many companies. But we just had a decision in favor of Google by the European High Court to say that the right to be forgotten should not exceed the boundaries of these 28 countries. So there is legislation which we need to apply carefully, and there is case law which demonstrates that it's not as regulated as we think. So it is the best standard, but we still look at the world as a big map to see where we have gray zones and maps. And which standard is the best? It's difficult to say. Like, we talk about digitalization. Where do we have the most digitalization of the economy? What are these countries? This is the US, China, if you look just at the percentage of GDP, what is their best standard in legislation? We heard from Olga and from others today that sometimes they allow for the entrepreneurs to develop things, not regulating too much, and this is probably a very good standard.
But haven't you just demonstrated the European law, the European Court now says that GDPR, the right to be forgotten, is not to be imposed outside of that. But how realistic is that today? Because what happens, of course, is that the device travels.
Right VPN.
How do you? You're the experts.
The more
time and money, and oftentimes go through a lot of years of just not knowing if their idea is good. So we feel very privileged oftentimes to hear and have the opportunity to back some of these companies. I don't ever judge a company based on their pitch, because somebody could be a phenomenal public speaker but have a terrible business idea.
Theranos, anybody?
Yeah, and so there's three things I look for. One, for the founder, it's just clarity of thought and the ability to articulate their vision. Why are they excited about what they're doing? Second, self-awareness. So a lot of times, you're doing a job for a first time as a CEO and you have to learn tons of roles that you've never had to do before. So just being self-aware about how quickly you can learn. And then third, of course, is this a critical pain point in a very, very large market?
A critical pinpoint.
Pain point.
Okay, so explain that.
Can your customers live without your solution? Or as we were hearing from the Service Titan guys a few days ago, they had a small group of customers that would absolutely, die if they turned off their products, so something like that.
That's the pain. Once they have you, they can't live without you. James, what do you look for in a company? Has somebody ever come up to you and you said, this company's had it and that's the company that's gone on to flourish?
Well, I have to say that pitch is always the most difficult barrier for startups from non-English speaking country, because you have to transcend language barriers and cultural barriers to be able to communicate with your host. And we spend a lot of time in Taiwan training our startups. And I can tell you it's not easy. You have to understand the culture and values of the other side to get your pitch right. But if I may, just a few words on IPO and capital, because companies in my part of the world tends to be very conservative, and many successful companies, they rather not go public. So there's so much money in the market, in the society. But the problem is many SMEs and young startups, they do need capital to grow. So what we did was, not long ago, we lowered the bar for startup companies in Taiwan to go public. And that's the way, I think that's the right direction for us to help our startups to grow, given there's so much money in the market.
Vahe, as a co-founder of a company like Service Titan, what mistakes did you make, and now you've learned and you know not to make those mistakes in pitching your company, because it never stops pitching your company. Even if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you're constantly having to reshape and reform that pitch.
Oh man, we'll be here all day if we're going through that list. For us, I would say it really came down to getting closer and closer to our customers, because I would echo what Nino said. At the end of the day, it's all about product market fit. Once you hit that, everything else is pretty straightforward. So the one piece of advice I would say is to just stay as close to that as possible and try to get to the point where it doesn't need to be at large scale. You could prove product market fit at a fairly small number of users or customers. But the biggest, if I think back in terms of the biggest mistakes that we made, it was when we deviated from that. It's when we would sit in the room and for 3 months or 6 months build something without actually having any sort of feedback loop. And anytime we didn't get that instant kind of reaction from those that would be using the product, that's when things usually went sideways.
Really, as you were watching the people up on stage with me when Nina was in the jury, Any feedback? You don't have to name names, but any feedback you'd have looking at those people, the presentation style?
Yeah, so I'm not like Nina, unfortunately. I'm very judgmental. So I judge you by your pitch because to me, the pitch is indicative of how you go out and sell your customers. So 100% as the person, if you are the face of your company, you need to practice that pitch 100 times. So whether you're selling investors to invest in your company or your customers. So very clearly, you have, to me, I look for what is that 1 or 2 sentence description of what your company is. So if you go through a whole 3 minutes and we're still like, what do they do? That's not a good sign.
Yeah, and you saw that happen to me on stage a couple of times. I said, are you guys sure what the company is? Because I wasn't sure. I had an idea, I think, but I wasn't 100% sure. And so, for me as a journalist, when someone's pitching a story to me, I need to know what your company does in 1 line. If it takes more than 1 line for you to explain the company that you invented, it's not a good sell for me. Tom, what have you learned from pitching? Just last year you were pitching your company.
Well, I think the pitching never stops, and so I agree with that. I guess I'll share one lesson in terms of investment I didn't make that you already referenced, which is the dubious distinction of turning down Peloton at the seed round of about $5 million valuation. So I, far from perfect, and John Foley was very good at pitching his vision. To me, it just seemed like there are so many different things that could go wrong. You had to get the hardware right. You had to get the market right. And so, made that big mistake. I think the big thing that I would say is that you never stop pitching. And that's become incredibly clear around Hedera right now. Our coin started trading a couple of weeks ago. It's down significantly, over 2/3. Since our last round, which was over a year ago. I left the company several months ago, and I was always an advocate for building deep, broad relationships with investors globally and for engaging in education around the world. When you're in a DLT space, it's very specialized, it's very narrow, and it takes a lot of education. And the market is certainly down since the last round that we raised, but and it's down 30 to 70% in terms of the altcoins. But you cannot educate enough, you cannot be in front of investors enough, and if you don't do that, you run a real risk of the next round, whether it's private or public, just landing with a thud, which is what nobody wants.
Caroline, you've taken 2 companies, you've founded them, they've been acquired. What did you learn from that pitching process, and what do you look for when students are coming to you and pitching their maybe just ideas at that point?
So I'd like to say that we are really in the talent business. At the seed stage, the early stage, at our accelerator, we're looking for talent, raw talent, number 1. Number 2 is that talent in a person who has a burning desire to solve a problem. And is that problem meaningful to them? Is it either their personal problem or a problem that's of someone they're close to or something that they really connect to in some way? So those fundamentals are difficult. You can't see those on a spreadsheet. It really is a person-to-person evaluation and discussion over time, which is hard to do when you're picking 25 companies in a space of 6 weeks, which is what we do twice a year. So that's number 1. In terms of what else is there, we're looking for something that they're making that is really differentiated from what's already out there. If it's something that's not particularly differentiated, do they have a brand new insight about a market or a customer that nobody else has hit upon before, and can they bring that to market? And then I would say overall pitching, for you founders out there, clearly state the problem. Extremely clearly state the problem and who has this problem and how your solution will address that problem, and then how it's going to be difficult for anybody else to do what you're doing.
So do you want to hear that at the top of the pitch? Here's the problem, and here's how Samuel's company is going to fix it?
So these are elements of the pitch, right? They're going to come, there's more or less a sequence of here's the problem, here's our solution, here's what we're building, here's the market we're going after, this is the customer, this is how we're going to execute, this is the general amount of fundraising we need to do, and this is why you should invest in me, because I will solve the world's great problems and make you very, very successful. You really want to close with that big closing, rah-rah, join me in my quest. Young founders, or young companies, not young founders, because founders are all ages. All ages can be great founders. And there's actually, as an aside, data that shows that the founders who are not very young actually have the best outcomes. So again, those of you who think I'm too old for a startup, if there's anybody here, you can drop that notion right now.
And Lucine, you work for GoPro, one of my favorite CEOs I've ever interviewed, Nick Woodman, CEO of GoPro. Did he pitch you, or did you have to pitch them when you went to GoPro? How was the pitching process like, and what did you learn from that?
I have slightly different background coming from Deloitte & Touche advisory services as I came into the space. So I'm a professional consultant. You know, I went through 10 years in advisory services. I served mid-market, large cap companies that are looking at an exit, looking at a liquidity event through an M&A or an IPO. So pre-IPO services, M&A services, and also various process setting, functional setup. GoPro in 2012, 2013 was contemplating going public, but wasn't really sure that the CEO and the founder and also majority shareholder, Nick Woodman, wasn't really 100% sure that this is what he wanted to do. GoPro was on my target portfolio as I was at Deloitte, and actually I pitched as a consultant to GoPro the support that Deloitte could provide in pre-IPO services, and he pitched to me coming in-house and becoming one of the people on the executive team. So when I joined, I helped with the discussion around how the process could be structured, how the decision-making could be structured. I was not the only one. We had a whole team, pre-IPO team, but it was interesting because it was privately family-owned, primarily family-owned, with a couple of smaller investors, and it took a lot of conversations to really figure out this is what he really wanted to do. He saw that going public was going to potentially make the company too public and, you know, make some of the things too bureaucratic and too formal. And so he kind of went through that process of realization that, yes, he's ready to invest, because being a public company in the US and in the rest of the world as well is a very expensive way of getting access to capital. And so you really need to be very clear that you're ready to be a public company.
So it was the mutually beneficial pitch to each other. So if people are in the room today, we've talked about how they pitch, what you're looking for. What are the best ways for people in a country like Armenia that may not have the access to capital markets in the way that a company in the UK or the US has? What are the best ways for companies of this smaller size to go about pursuing money? So we can just jump into the conversation now. It doesn't have to be one by one. Go ahead.
So I would say, given where we are today in terms of the tools available and the speed with which you can build products, I would say the best thing any startup in the room could do is to demonstrate traction, is to be able to get to a point where they actually can show, hey, we have customers that love us, or to show a path towards getting there quickly. I think if you could do that, there's so much capital out there, and there's enough funds here that they will find you. So to me, the key has always been to be the buyer in the process and not the seller. And so if there's one thing to focus on, it's to accelerate the path towards product market fit and to get to the point where you could demonstrate that.
I see you nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think investors like traction. So if you can show that, that's like, you know, a really attractive person in a nice outfit. It's you show the packaging that's there. The other thing that I would say is, you know, investors travel and you travel, so we advise our startups to follow the investors on Twitter, because we often, like I posted that I was going to be at WCIT, and a couple of startups reached out to me beforehand, and so we say that is like use those unique touch points to meet investors outside their office, where you will have their undivided attention. Like, it's really hard to get a meeting with me, but you know, here when I'm eating lunch or something, there's less distractions.
I can jump in. So we've made 40 investments in Armenian-led startups, and one of the things that I tell a lot of founders here is like, look, like you can reach anybody through like LinkedIn, email, social media. If you really want to, let's say there's a dream VC that's invested in your space and has your domain expertise, one really great thing is to reach out to other founders in their portfolio. Founders are so open to helping other founders that are especially earlier in their journey. So, look at their portfolio, see who else they've backed. If there's a founder that was backed at a similar stage as you, reach out to them. I'm sure they'd be willing to help. And I promise you, no VC will ever say no to a meeting that comes through an intro from one of their portfolio companies.
Yeah, I think definitely even as a journalist, when a company reaches out to me and I see they're following me on Twitter, not just for my ego, but I think because you're doing your research, you know who I am. If you're reaching out to me and you call me Daniel instead of Samuel, I'm thinking you're not doing your research. So I think all of those things can be more than just tickling the ego, but a sign that they really mean business. I think you wanted to jump in, Caroline?
So speaking of pitching, I'd like to pitch my program because we are open to companies in Armenia. Berkeley Skydeck is open to companies in Armenia. In fact, we have one of our founders here, Kachik, the founder of Grow. So if you want to ask him about our program, you can ask him. It's a highly competitive program, though, so about 3% of applicants get in, but don't be dismayed. Do apply. But there are lots of growing resources. Nina's Fund, the Hive Fund. There's a program at the American University of Amsterdam that Michael runs called EPIC. There's a lot out there if you hustle and look. And our advisor, Karin, is incredibly well connected. I would also recommend him as a great source of all of the resources that you can find as a founder here in Armenia.
What are the advantages that a startup or a company with an innovative idea has being Armenian? I think a lot of times, a lot of places say, oh, it's so hard competing against the US or the big countries in the EU. So when you look at an Armenian startup, what are those advantages that they might have over their competitors in other countries?
I'm going to have Vi answer this question because they just opened an office in Armenia for Service Titan, and maybe you can talk a little bit about why you made that as a business decision.
Sure. I think one of the biggest advantages that you have being an Armenian in Armenia is that, if you were to try to hire an engineer in San Francisco, you could spend several $100,000, but over here, that talent is going to be much more accessible. And I would say the diaspora is probably the other big secret weapon here, because if you could get to the point where you are within striking distance of that product market fit, even though the country itself is fairly small, the network has access far beyond the borders. And so, you combine that with the level of energy that exists here. I mean, I haven't been coming here for too long, but just in the last 2-3 years, every year there's huge leaps and bounds in terms of the progress being made. So I think the combinations of all those things really make it an exciting place to be a startup founder.
And are there models that people can look at? I always think of Israel when I'm in smaller countries. Israel is this country that has basically no domestic market, so they immediately look to exporting their products, for instance. They can't sell to their neighbors a lot of the time, so they have to look much farther than even just their region, and they rely on, there's a lot of self-reliance there. They've created this kind of hub amongst themselves, and everybody's willing to help out each other, just like you were pointing to. So is a company in a place like Armenia smarter to look at a place like Israel than they are the US?
I would say Israel is the golden model. And so for a country like Armenia, it's one of those, why reinvent the wheel? They've already demonstrated the path to success. And so I always encourage anybody that I'm speaking to, whether it's government officials or startups, if we want to see how it's done, look at Israel, because they've definitely figured it out.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I think because there's different dynamics here where the local market is not as big, I think a lot of investors want to see, can your vision scale beyond Armenia? But also, times have changed so much in terms of being able to acquire customers sitting in Armenia. And so that has brought a lot of the barriers down. But I think what really helped Israel is they had a couple of exits very quickly. And if you think about it, that is absolutely critical for putting a company like Armenia on the map, because not only, for example, let's say employees work at a great startup here that has an exit. That is basically seeding the next generation of entrepreneurs, because when that exit happens, they've been trained by a successful company, and now they have wealth to take a risk to start a company. And so We're still in the early days of exits in Armenia, but I think that will be a game changer.
And one of the things that's been the biggest takeaway for me, not just covering technology, but also just in terms of mentality, is Israel's embrace of failure. They have the chief scientist in Israel who invests Israeli tax money, takes people's taxes, gives it to companies, and unlike even the United States, where there's been huge scandal when you had a solar panel company that failed under the Obama administration, the chief scientist will call up that startup and say, Mazel tov, congratulations that your company failed. And when he first said this to me, I was like, are you high? What are you thinking? You just lost money. And he said that means that we're that much closer to those people closing that company, forming another company, maybe failing again, and finally forming a company, seeing what works and being successful, and helping all of our other Israeli startups. So there's just this mentality, which I really think has played very well, beginning in the Israeli military, actually, where it begins, where they encourage trial and failure. And so I think that's something that a lot of places trying to emulate Israel can learn, especially in the smaller markets. How does somebody decide once they have somebody's ear like yours, okay, I'm going to be getting money. How do you make that decision about what the equation is going to look like? What percentage are you going to hold in my company? For so many people, this is just like, someone's throwing money at me. Yes, 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 and you don't really know. So what's advice that somebody on the panel might have about, okay, now getting down to business, even though you might just be so eager to say yes no matter what?
I would say research your investor. Because once you take money from them, it's really hard to go back.
It's a bit like a marriage.
Yeah, it's so...
But divorce might be easier in a marriage.
It definitely is. The legal entanglements of taking venture capital money, and there's some just shady VCs out there. Not on this panel, but out in the general ecosystem.
There's some sharks out there.
Yeah, no, there's sharks, and there are people who, we do social impact investing, and if you're building, I'm sure you're building the company because you're passionate about that thing, and you want to make sure that the investor is also passionate about what you're building, because they're more likely to keep that company intact.
So when you say research your investor, does that mean going to other companies that have been invested in by your investor and saying how much, what percentage did they take?
Yeah, so one, definitely, I think Nina said this earlier, talk to other companies in the portfolio to see how that VC worked and if they had a good working relationship. And then two, to find out to make sure they invest at the stage you're investing in. And then three, to make sure they haven't already invested in your competitor. We've had people come and pitch us, and this is, to me, the biggest no-no, where a company will come in and say how they're so much better than another company, and that's the company I've invested in. And I'm like, ooh, this person didn't do their research. So I think just doing your research overall on a potential investor is a good thing to do.
And should you avoid your investor if they're invested in a competitor, even if you're willing to say positive things or neutral things about your competitor? Any thoughts on that?
We don't invest in competitors.
No?
No.
Caroline?
So we have a model at the accelerator where it's a standard investment in all the companies that get in, but we continually advise, and for that, we will not take a competing company in the same batch. We will take competing companies that are in different batches. But most investors will not take head-to-head competitors in the same portfolio. And then in terms of how do we advise companies when they are then raising a round after Skydeck, there's just a couple of basic things. For valuation, how desperate are you for the money, right? What's your runway? In other words, how many more months can you survive without money? Number two, if you don't desperately need the money, what's the opportunity cost of not getting that money? What's a market you couldn't go after? What's a product you couldn't build and how valuable that is? And number three, echoing what others have said, the value of the dollar from the investor is directly correlated with the value of that investor, both in terms of their reputation and how much they can help you. So it can be worthwhile to take a bit of a hit on valuation if that investor is going to be an absolute rock star on your cap table and someone who can really help you build your business.
And the thing I'd add to that is that when we raised, I was surprised at the investors who promised a huge amount and delivered nothing. and those who didn't promise much but delivered a terrific deal. And so that is, I think, a very important thing, is investors can help you with recruiting, with customers, with employees, and also, very importantly, is signaling for later rounds as well, and that reputation, which is very important. But I mean, I'm still amazed at the missed expectations of some investors that we had, and so just be prepared for that. It's also why you should always have multiple investors in every round, which is also where you get your valuation a bit, and you make sure investors work well together by not having just one in any round, but making sure they work well together.
So it's just like they say, don't put all of your money in one pot, don't take all of your money from one pot. Vahe, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One, I think this goes back to the value of investing in a network of other founders, because going back to your question of how do you know if it's a good or bad offer, that's really going to be your best resource as a founder to get that input. And then the second, we've raised 4 rounds, we raised over $300 million, and in every single round, we did not go with the biggest offer. Because for us, what mattered way more was the quality of the partner and the value add component than the one who's willing to write the biggest check. And so to me, that's much more important than trying to maximize valuation.
So it wasn't just what they were going to deliver to you monetarily, it was the type of support that they were going to give you as well?
Well, it comes in a few different flavors. One of them is just, you need to emotionally connect with the investor, because it really is like a marriage. Like in some ways, it's even a bigger commitment than a marriage. But secondly, it's about what beyond capital can they deliver, and whether that's in the form of just support, or it's in the form of recruiting, or connections, or introductions, or any of those things. Typically, in today's market, there's so much capital out there that as a company, especially if you're in demand, that's where you're going to win, is to find an investor who can bring that value add. And the other thing that happens is, like for us, when we did our Series A, most of the value we got was from the amazing brand that we got the Series A from. We had, the quality of our hires and everything else. We had people tell us they specifically came to us because of the investor that put the money. The signal that sends is hugely powerful for a startup.
I'll just say 2 tactical things. In general, you don't want to give up 20% of dilution in each round. That's just like the soft number that is the market average right now. And second,
don't want to give up
more than 20%. 20% is like the average dilution of giving up in each round.
I like the specifics, Nina.
Second of all, if any seed investor asks you for like a 5-year financial model or projection and is going to make their investment decision off of that, just run the other way.
Elaborate on that.
Because like when you're a seed stage company, again, it's all about some of the fundamentals that this panel has already said. Like, are you a founder that's passionate? Can you clearly articulate your business? Are you solving a mission critical pain point in a very large market? You don't have a lot of financial numbers at the seed stage. So anyone that's going to ask you for like a 5-year projection and make their investment decision off of that probably doesn't know what they're doing.
And Caroline, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, 2 things. So there's an exception to every rule, and the exception to the one investor rule can often be if the investor is a strategic, in other words, a corporation that is in the industry that your startup is in. That's what we did with NeuroFocus. We funded it ourselves in the seed stage. That's an interesting story, but worked out well. And our first and only investor at Series A was Nielsen. You got to make sure there's no competitive issues in there, that everything is completely open source. They ended up acquiring our company. The second thing I would say, is what Nina said. With the abundance of capital, is there a lot of rookie investors. They may not be bad intent investors, but they just don't know what they're doing yet. And they'll ask for things like a 5-year projection for a seed stage company. So find out the track record of your investor. How many investments have they made? And most important, get the cell phone numbers of some of the people in their portfolio companies. Do not skip that step, ever, and find out how they are treated by that investor.
So just to disagree with one of those points, the strategic investor early on, I think, is very dangerous. And I'm glad it worked out, and that's terrific, but that actually can both put you under the microscope with that company. You can be subject to corporate politics, number one. Number two, it can diminish the value of an exit, as other groups in the industry just assume your strategic investor is going to acquire you, and if they don't, it's because they have more information than the outside companies, and so they're less likely to bid for it. So I'm very reluctant to take strategic capital unless it's very late stage and very close to a public offering of some kind.
The exception to the exception
Fair
of the
enough.
rule.
No, I agree. If you
Wait, say that again, Caroline?
She said exception to the exception.
Yeah.
I would say if you're taking strategic money, you need to be very careful about what the term sheet looks like, because a lot of strategic investors will want right of first refusal. So if you sell, you have to offer it to them first. They'll want special access to IP. So just be very, very careful. Have very, very good lawyers if you decide to take strategic capital.
I'll just add a couple of points. I think maybe to bring it a little bit home to the Armenian startup ecosystem, I think you need to be really clear what is it that you want from the VC or an angel or a strategic investor. I agree that we have a lot of similarities with Israel. I work with several companies, American companies that had acquired Israeli companies. What we have as Armenians is similarly with Israel as a very large and accomplished diaspora. I don't think we fully utilize those resources, but it's a huge opportunity. The other aspect of that is when we are a small country landlocked with just a very nascent, very early stage of maturity in our ecosystem, very promising, but we are also sometimes desperate for that first investment or a signal that an external investor, a VC, from the US or somewhere in Europe, for example, believes in us. So we go for money rather than what is it that we exactly want above and beyond money. So do we look for the network? Do we look for support internationally, through explosive growth? Do we look for very key metrics that we want to accomplish to help us as a startup founder be successful in the next rounds? So sometimes I see in discussions with the various startups, especially coming from Armenia, we overly focus on the funding aspect of it and just giving away too much too early.
If there's anybody who has any questions, feel free to raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur. Anybody? No? Come on down. Yeah. I would, but I think I might fall. Oh no, there's stairs there. I'll come over. Just tell us who you are and...
Hi, my name is Annie, and I have maybe an amateur, very basic question about startups, but being an entrepreneur, where is the best place you can learn terminology and the process of beginning to work with an investor? There's a lot that you can read on, you can learn, you can speak with people, but where do you get educated as an entrepreneur on how to start a conversation and learn the language of an investor?
I mean, Y Combinator has amazing resources. You just go to YC, they have everything from how much equity you should give to your co-founder to what the investment ranges are in terms of dilution. They explain all the terms of what's the difference between a safe and a convertible note. I mean, there's so many resources. I'd say that's a great place to start.
Y Combinator.
Yeah. I would also say VC Deals by Brad Feld. That's the textbook we give to all of our interns at Gaper Capital.
That also, Secrets of Sandhill Road by Scott Cooper.
I'll put this out on my Twitter account, @SamuelH. to make sure everybody can go back and read those resources. Question? I'll come to you. Or maybe I should have you come up here for the cameras. Come on down. Or up.
Yeah, hi. I just had a small question. How can we think of to sell shares or not to sell? I mean, what is the verge to decide? My company is 4 years old and I need around 20K or something. And I know that in 2 years I will cover this 20K. So shall I sell shares or take some money from other resources or just keep it as it is? I don't know, I'm sorry, I couldn't make the proper question. If I have a company that needs money, how can I know that I need to sell shares or get other money or some routes to do this?
Is the question
Yes, is the question what is the ways to calculate or to think of selling shares when you need money?
You mean giving away equity rather than selling shares via, let's say, a public market? Okay. So.
Or like primary versus secondary?
Equity or debt?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in terms of equity versus debt in a startup scenario, number one, good luck getting a lot of debt capital. Secondly, I mean, the dynamics around having to pay that money back and having that additional burden on your cash flows when you're likely going to need more capital down the road. I mean, I don't know if there's people doing it now, but that's fairly rare to even have access to that, much less use that as a viable option.
I'd also go into certainty and to what return do you expect that capital to generate and how certain are you that it will do it. So if you are completely certain because there is a contract that you have signed, but you need working capital to get it done, you can take a loan, maybe you take a loan to fulfill the working capital required for that contract because you know with a high degree of certainty it'll be fulfilled and you'll be able to pay it back. If that's not the case, it's just an investment that will help you generate more business over the longer term. That's a very different risk and a very different profile that is probably less suited to debt, would be my guess.
Just remember, in an exit, the debt gets paid back first, and then everybody else. So, important to recognize.
And you said you wanted to exit soon, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, she said you're saying that you want to exit soon? She's asking.
No.
No.
I need a partner for investment. I'm thinking and I need...
Looking for a partner or investment, enjoys long walks on the beach.
Or alone, I mean, I'm thinking to do this.
Any other words? That's it, okay. All right, good luck. Do we have time? Oh no, they're cutting me off. I'll grab you afterward and get someone to answer your question. I really want to thank the panel, guys. Thanks for jumping in and answering the audience's questions. I really appreciate it. So thank you to the entire panel. A group picture? Yeah. Do you guys want to do?
Now, let me introduce you to Alex Yesayan, an entrepreneur in the technological field since founding his first company in 1998. At the stupidly young age of 16, he has been active in most of his life in the promotion of Armenia and its IT sector. A co-founder of UCOM, one of the top ICT companies in Armenia, he's also president of the Union of Advanced Technological Enterprises, which seeks to consolidate the Armenian high-tech community around one center, one vision. Please let me introduce you, Alex Yesayan.
Dear friends, it is a real pleasure and honor to be in this stage and welcome all you to Armenia. This was a big dream to bring this conference to Armenia, and especially Karen Vartanyan, CEO of UAT, had this dream for more than 10 years. And in 2014, we had a chance with the delegation from UATE, heading Haik Chobanyan, to present the bid to have the conference in Armenia. It was 5 years ago, and we win this bid by showing, presenting the power of decentralization theme to the Committee of Vitsa. So Armenia is now uniquely positioned, I think, today to become the center for these next 3 days, as well to become the center in the region as IT is developing in our country. So I am very happy to see all our guests coming from all different places, and we are very happy to have this conference in Armenia. Thank you very much and welcome to Armenia. Let's have a great conference. Thanks.
Շնորհակալ եմ։ Տեղեկատվական տեխնոլոգիաների 23-րդ համաշխարհային կոնգրեսի հարգելի մասնակիցներ, հարգելի հյուրեր։ Ողջունում եմ ձեզ Հայաստանի Հանրապետության մայրաքաղաք Երևանում համաշխարհային նշանակության այս հավաքի բացման առիթով։ Մեզ համար մեծ պատիվ է եւ հաճույք այսպիսի համաժողով հյուրընկալելը, որովհետեւ այն շատ լավ առիթ է ձեզ եւ ձեր միջոցով միջազգային հանրության հետ խոսելու, Հայաստանը բարձր տեխնոլոգիական, արդյունաբերական երկիր դարձնելու մեր ռազմավարության մասին եւ ես հույս ունեմ մեր երկրում անցկացրած մի քանի օրերի ընթացքում դուք կզգաք այն նոր էներգիան եւ մթնոլորտը, որ մեր երկրին համակել է նախորդ տարի Հայաստանում տեղի ունեցած ոչ բռնի թավշյա ժողովրդական հեղափոխությունից հետո։ Ուզում եմ ընդգծել, որ այդ հեղափոխությունը տեղի ունեցավ ապակենտրոնացման միջոցով, ինչի արդյունքում Հայաստանը համաշխարհային քարտեզի վրա դարձավ ժողովրդավարության կենտրոն։ Եվ ահա քաղաքական այս հեղափոխությունից հետո այժմ մենք գտնվում ենք տնտեսական հեղափոխության շրջափուլում, որը նույնպես տեղի է ունենում ապակենտրոնացման շնորհիվ, որովհետև մենք տնտեսական հեղափոխության հիմնական միջոց համարում ենք յուրաքանչյուր քաղաքացու անհատական ջանքը, անհատական նախաձեռնությունը, որը նա անում է ոչ թե կառավարության հրահանգով, այլ իր անձնական որոշումներով, իր անձնական նպատակներով եւ ամբիցիաներով։ Եվ ահա մեր երկրի տնտեսությունը տպավորիչ աճ է գրանցում։ Այս պահին ունենք 7% տնտեսական աճ, մեր երկրում туриզմը տպավորիչ աճ է արձանագրում, այս տարի ունենք туриզմի շուրջ 13% աճ, տպավորիչ աճ է գրանցում նաև տեխնոլոգիական ապրանքների արտահանումը։ Առաջին 7 ամսվա կտրվածքով միջին տեխնոլոգիատար ապրանքների արտահանումը մեր երկրից աճել է 40.9%-ով, իսկ բարձր տեխնոլոգիատար ապրանքների արտահանումը 34.4%-ով։ Այս ամենը մեզ վստահություն է տալիս, որ Հայաստանում տեղի ունեցող տնտեսական հեղափոխությունը իր հերթին կհանգեցնի տեխնոլոգիական հեղափոխության, եւ մենք կկարողանանք Հայաստանը դարձնել տեխնոլոգիական, նորարարական առաջատար երկրներից մեկը աշխարհում, իսկական տեխնոլոգիական կենտրոն։ Այս նպատակը մեզ հասանելի եւ իրատեսական է թվում նաեւ այն պատճառով, որ հայ ժողովրդի բազմաթիվ զավակներ տեխնոլոգիական հանրահայտ նորարարությունների հեղինակներ են։ 1853 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Հովհաննես Ղուկասյանը ստեղծեց կերոսինային լամպը, այսպիսով նոր ուժ հաղորդելով տեխնոլոգիական լուսավորության դարաշրջանին, հեղափոխություն իրականացնելով մարդկանց առօրյա կյանքում։ 1854 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Քրիստափոր Տեր-Սերոփյանը ստեղծեց ԱՄՆ դոլարի կանաչ գույնը, եւ այդ կանաչը մինչև հիմա համարվում է դոլարի բացառիկ գույն։ 1911 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Գաբրիել Կազանչյանը ստեղծեց մազեր չորացնող սարքավորումը, բոլորիս հայտնի ֆենը։ 1916 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Ստեփան Ստեփանյանը ստեղծեց մեխանիկական բետոնախառնիչը, որը ժամանակակից աշխարհում նույնքան տարածված է, որքան ֆենը։ 1930-ականներին մեր հայրենակից Հովհաննես Ադամյանը ձևակերպեց եւ ստեղծեց այն ալգորիթմը, տեխնոլոգիան, որը հնարավոր դարձրեց գունավոր հեռուստացույցների ստեղծումը։ Ժամանակակից աշխարհը դժվար է պատկերացնել առանց գունավոր հեռուստացույցի, դոլարի կանաչի, ֆենի կամ մեխանիկական բետոնախառնիչի։ 1931 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Ասատուր Սաֆարյանը ստեղծեց ավտոմեքենաների ավտոմատ փոխանցման տուփը, նոր հեռանկարներ բացելով ավտոմոբիլաշինության հետագա զարգացման համար։ 1939 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Լյութեր Գևորգ Սիմիջյանը ստեղծեց բոլորիս հայտնի բանկոմատը, որը նույնքան տարածված է ժամանակակից աշխարհում, որքան դոլարը, ֆենը, որքան բետոնի մեխանիկական խառնիչը, որքան գունավոր հեռուստացույցը, որքան ավտոմատ փոխանցումատուփով ավտոմեքենա։ Բայց սա դեռ վերջը չէ, իզուր եք շտապում։ 1960-ականներին մեր հայրենակից Միքայել Տեր-Պողոսյանը դարձավ տոմոգրաֆիայի հիմնադիրներից մեկը, որը հեղափոխական նշանակության նորարարություն էր առողջապահության ոլորտում։ 1970-ականներին մեր հայրենակից Ռայմոնդ Տամատյանը ստեղծեց մագնիսական ռեզոնանսային սկանավորման սարքը, որը մի նոր հեղափոխություն դարձավ առողջապահության ոլորտում։ Այս երկու հայտնագործությունները միլիոնավոր, 100 միլիոնավոր կյանքեր են փրկել ամբողջ աշխարհում, բարելավել են 100 միլիոնավոր մարդկանց կյանքի որակը։ 1995 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Էմի Կավակյանը ստեղծեց հաշմանդամություն ունեցող անձանց համար նախատեսված ինքնագնաց սայլակը, փոխելով հաշմանդամություն ունեցող միլիոնավոր մարդկանց կյանքը։ 2006 թվականին մեր հայրենակից Յուրի Օգանիսյանը հայտնաբերեց Մենդելեևի պարբերական աղյուսակի 118-րդ քիմիական տարը, որը հենց գիտնականի պատվին կոչվում է օգանեսոն։ Այս թվարկումը դեռ երկար կարելի է շարունակել, հիշատակելով աշխարհահռչակ MiG ինքնաթիռների հեղինակ Արտյոմ Միկոյանին, ամերիկյան բանակում օգտագործվող հակագազերի հեղինակ Արթուր Բլբուլյանին, պլաստիկ վիրաբուժության համահիմնադիրներից մեկին Վարազդատ Կազանջյանին, ժամանակակից միալծակ ծորակի հեղինակ Ալեքս Մանուկյանին։ Այս ամենը եւ այն փաստը, որ խորհրդային առաջին համակարգիչը Նաիրի անունով ստեղծվել է Հայաստանում, այն փաստը, որ մեր բազմաթիվ հայրենակիցներ գործուն մասնակցություն են ունեցել խորհրդային եւ ամերիկյան տիեզերական ծրագրերում, այն փաստը, որ այսօր էլ համաշխարհային տեխնոլոգիական նորարարության ոլորտում մեր շատ հայրենակիցներ լրջագույն հաջողություններ են գրանցում, մեզ վստահություն է տալիս, որ Հայաստանը իսկապես դառնալու է տեխնոլոգիական ոլորտի կարևոր կետերից մեկը աշխարհում, կարևոր կենտրոններից մեկը աշխարհում։ Այս նպատակով մենք ընդարձակ հարկային արտոնություններ ենք նախատեսել Հայաստանում նոր ստեղծվող տեխնոլոգիական ընկերությունների համար, որոնք մինչև 2023 թվականը ազատված են շահութահարկից եւ վճարում են ընդամենը 10% եկամտային հարկ։ Որպես արդյունք մեր երկրում տեղեկատվական տեխնոլոգիաների ոլորտը վերջին 7 տարում աճել է շուրջ 5 անգամ եւ ամեն տարի կայուն 20-25%-անոց աճ է գրանցում։ Մենք խնդիր ենք դրել լրջորեն զարգացնել կրթությունը, սկսած նախակրթարաններից մինչև մագիստրատուրա եւ ասպիրանտուրա, եւ ասում ենք, որ մեր երկրում կրթությունը պետք է դառնա ազգային ապրելակերպ, այն տրամաբանությամբ, որ մեր երկրում մարդը երբեք ու երբեք չպետք է դադարի սովորել, եւ մեր բոլորի, սկսած վարչապետից, ավարտած համակարգչային օպերատորով կրթական ցենզը, պրոֆեսիոնալ մակարդակը ամեն հաջորդ օր պետք է ավելի բարձր լինի, քան նախորդ օրը։ Տեղեկատվական տեխնոլոգիաների համաշխարհային 23-րդ կոնգրեսի սիրելի մասնակիցներ, մենք հավատում ենք, որ Հայաստանը կարող ենք դարձնել դրախտ տաղանդավոր մարդկանց համար։ Ինչպես երկար տարիներ աշխարհի տարբեր երկրներ, Ֆրանսիան, Ռուսաստանը, Ամերիկայի Միացյալ Նահանգները, Սինգապուրը, Մեծ Բրիտանիան, Հնդկաստանը, Իրանը, բազմաթիվ այլ երկրներ սեփական տաղանդը զարգացնելու եւ դրսեւորելու, կրթություն ստանալու եւ հայտնագործություններ անելու հնարավորություն են տվել հայոց ցեղասպանությունից մազապուրծ մեզ բազմաթիվ հայրենակիցների, որոնց մի մասին ես հիշատակեցի որպես համաշխարհային նշանակության նոր արարությունների հեղինակների, այնպես էլ հիմա ազատ եւ զարգացող ինքնիշխան Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը դառնում է ավելի ու ավելի գրավիչ երկիր տեխնոլոգիական, կրթական, նորարարական ներդրումների, գործունեության եւ կրթության համար։ Մենք ընդամենը ամիսներ առաջ ստեղծել ենք նոր բարձր տեխնոլոգիական արդյունաբերության նախարարություն, որպեսզի ոլորտով հետաքրքրված բոլոր մասնագետները, սկսնակները, ներդրողներն ու գործընկերները իմանան, նրանց համար կոնկրետ լինի, թե Հայաստանում որն է իրենց հասցեն։ Բարձր տեխնոլոգիական արդյունաբերության նախարար Արշակյանը այս համաժողովը Հայաստանում անցկացնելու ամենամեծ ջատագովներից մեկն էր, եւ ես հույս ունեմ, որ այս հիրավի հիշարժան իրադարձությունը շատ բան կփոխի տեխնոլոգիական աշխարհի եւ Հայաստանի Հանրապետության հարաբերություններում։ Եվ մեզ բոլորիս, սիրելի ներկաներ, հաջողություններ եմ մաղթում բարձր տեխնոլոգիաների միջոցով աշխարհը ավելի մարդասեր, ավելի աստվածավախ, ավելի քաղաքակիրթ ու հանդուրժող դարձնելու գործում։ Հարգելի հյուրեր, տեխնոլոգիան տեխնոլոգիա, բայց խնդրում եմ բաց չթողնեք հայկական արևահամ մրգերը, անմոռանալի խորտիկները, դրախտային գինին ու կոնյակը վայելելու այս բացառիկ հնարավորությունը։ Եվ իհարկե հայկական աշունը, որը տաք ու հյուրընկալ է ինչպես միշտ։ Հույս ունեմ առաջատար տեխնոլոգիաների ձեռնարկությունների միությունը Հայաստանը վայելելու ժամանակ է թողել մեր բոլոր հյուրերի համար։ Շնորհակալ եմ ուշադրության համար։
I am 57. Yes?
No way, no way.
Yes? Looking good on it, I hear you say. But as anybody of a certain age knows, after a 14-hour flight or a long night or a hard day at work, bits hurt. So what would I be prepared to do to my body to improve it? Don't answer that. How would I augment myself? What would you do to yourself to augment it, if anything? You want to change the capitalist structure of the world, but would you change your body? And you're already wearing something that's strange that you'll tell us about. And for you too, sir. As for this man, he's going to lead our discussion with a keynote speech on augmented humanity. What it means, what we need to think about. Jamie Metzel, please.
Thank you, Richard. And you're perfect, don't change a thing. So how many of you, when you see this title, Augmented Human, how many of you think, well, that seems kind of scary? I know what a human is, and an augmented human, that seems kind of sci-fi, kind of cyborg. Just raise your hand if there's something that feels a little scary about augmented human. And it does, because we've seen all these films of these people who are part person, part cyborg. It's in a lot of the Star Trek, and it scares us. But you know who are augmented humans? All of you. Maybe there are some people in this audience who have pacemakers. That means you're a cyborg. Maybe there are people who have cochlear implants, also a cyborg. Maybe some of you have this ultimate superpower, augmented human superpower that our ancestors didn't have because you were immunized, and that's why people aren't being wiped out. Maybe you're wearing glasses. So the question for us is not augmented or not augmented. We are augmented. That's why we are here. The question is how and what are the limits? Because we have always co-evolved with our technology. The reason why the population of this country and the world is so high is because of agriculture. When we were hunter-gatherers, we couldn't live with this kind of population density. And when we think of evolution, we think of it as kind of fixed in a way. And yet we should know that from our history, evolution is the most variable thing of all. In 3.8 billion years, we went from being single-cell organisms to being us. And this was never the end point of our evolutionary journey. We've only been Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years, and we are fast on our way to something else, and something big, and something profound. And now is the moment when that is happening. And a lot of people, when I talk about this, say, well, geez, that scares me. And it should. It should excite you, and it should scare you. And they say that doesn't feel natural. And then the question is, well, what does feel natural? There's nothing natural about agriculture, or about healthcare, or about cities, or about pretty much anything we do. So the question isn't natural versus non-natural. We are living non-natural lives according to how our ancestors lived. But the reason this moment is so big and so essential, and why it's so important that we're all meeting together now, is we are at this takeoff point for our species. We are more educated, more connected than ever before. So what does that mean? Different parts of the world, we're in a part of the world that developed agriculture first. But there were other parts of the world, in Asia and China, it was a 2,000-year gap from when agriculture began here to when agriculture began there. Now, if you invent something, whatever it is, the equivalent of the plow, of agriculture, it's an email, it's a post away from everyone on Earth. So there you go, you just made if you're in this other place, you just got a 2,000-year jump. You are ahead, and that's with everything, with every aspect of knowledge, with more and more humans who are part of this process. And then we talk about different technologies. We talked about IT and AI this morning. But the reason we're at a takeoff point is we're seeing a super convergence of all of these technologies that are leaning against each other. And because we are experiencing this exponential change, and as we're seeing with Moore's Law, but it's across a lot of technologies of speeding up change, what it means is that our sense of time looking in the rearview mirror is too slow because we are on a J-curve of change. And so if you are thinking, well, I know what a 10-year unit of change is because I remember what the world was like in 2009, that is not a 10-year unit of change. Let's call that a 6-year unit of change. And then that 6-year unit of change becomes a 3-year unit of change. You get that. So we are moving, we are barreling forward. And what that is doing is creating a world where the worlds of science and the worlds of science fiction are connected. I write both nonfiction and science fiction, and really the only difference is characters and a few sex scenes, because we are now at a time, that was a joke by the way, you can laugh. We are now at a time where the limits on our productive capacity are in many ways just the limits of our individual and collective imagination. And that is a really, really big deal. And what is that going to open up? We're going to talk about some of these technologies. We're doing a panel on Wednesday on genetic engineering. And we're going to fundamentally change the way that we do healthcare, moving from generalized to precision to predictive healthcare. The way we make babies, moving from, and I'll talk about this on Wednesday, conception through sex to conception through science. The nature of the babies, the nature of the babies that we make. We're going to use technology to live longer. We are going to bring technologies into ourselves. Right now, everyone is carrying around these phones. All of those technologies are coming into us, and everything is going to come together. I don't want to go through all of the details because you know it, and in many ways, the issue isn't just the details of the different technologies or even all of the technologies. The issue is where it's going. And there are many people who think, well, I kind of have a model for how to think about these technologies, which is therapeutic applications, curing diseases. That stuff is the good stuff. Kind of helping people get to the level of normal, what we see as normal, that's the good stuff. But going beyond normal, that's the bad stuff. That's the enhancement. But there's really no possible way to divide the normal and the enhanced, because all of life is on a spectrum. And it's not just the spectrum of what is possible for a human. I mean, we have our lowest IQ and our highest IQ. But we are already enhancing ourselves. Right now, there are some people who are born with bad eyesight. In the old days, those people would have had, in many cases, a hard time surviving. And now we have glasses. And then we have telescopes and microscopes. And now we can see into cells and we can see out into the stars. If someone had to say, well, what is normal for vision? How could you answer that question? You can't answer it about health. You can't answer it about age. You really can't answer it about anything. And so the question is not, should we or should we not play God? We are species, into quoting Stuart Brand, we are already as gods. We are already as gods, and the question is, can we get good at it in time? And that is really what we need to be thinking about, because the pressures are going to push us forward. We talked this morning about these technologies being decentralized and dispersed around the world, which is great. It's why we can be here in Armenia talking about revolutionary technologies, and this is as good of a place as any. We also talked about cultural differences. Different societies have different ways of thinking about technology and their use, and we see that across the board. And then these societies and communities with different values and systems and norms are competing with each other, whether it's this AI race between the United States and China that is in many ways going to define economics for the 21st century, whether it's issues of how to use autonomous killer robots, which are, again, human augmentations. And if you're a defense minister of a country, if you do use autonomous killer robots, you're potentially putting human life on Earth at risk. But if you don't use it and your adversary does, you're putting your country at risk. How are we going to think about these things? And this then leads us into the issue of principles. And we talked this morning all about principles. In many ways, the issues are the same here. What are the ethical systems that we want to guide our decision making? Because all of these technologies are value neutral. They don't come with their own values built in. Their values are our values. And how do we make sure that we can use these technologies that enhance inclusiveness, that enhance our cohesiveness as communities and as a species, that don't undermine our essential diversity, which is the core survival strategy of our species? And then how do we think about building the kinds of norms, having empowered conversations of people who are educated about these topics? We bring into dialogues and engage and listen to each other and then build norms that can lead to regulations and laws and international laws. And it's all the more difficult because there's this mismatch of this science that is racing forward exponentially and these regulatory infrastructures that are only inching forward glacially. But because now is the time when these technologies are all coming to fruition, we all must be, as Dick Clark said this morning, we all must be part of the process of shaping these technologies, and rather than having other people shape how these technologies impact our lives. And we have to see the incredible positive story, because every time some little kid dies of some terrible genetic disease, or a 100-year-old person gets Alzheimer's or dementia, that is a crime against potential. And so we have to embrace, it would be insane not to embrace these technologies that are going to do so much good for us. And we would also be insane to not recognize that there are real risks that we have to be mindful of, and we have to begin addressing together and now. Because the question for all of us, it's not enhancement, yes or no. It's not augmented human, yes or no. The answer is yes. The real question for us is how best do we embrace these technologies in ways that can optimize their benefits and minimize their harms. So let me stop there and hand it back over to Richard.
Right. So you have framed the question. Let's meet our panel, and slightly different to how we've done earlier, I want you, in a sentence or five, tell us who you are and why you're qualified to be on this panel.
I cannot answer the question about being qualified to be on this panel, but my business is biotechnology and curing cancer, augmenting the body's natural immune system to improve the odds in favor of the body to defeat cancer. My second area of expertise is philanthropic technologies, which means through Children of Armenia Fund, here based in Armenia, how do I change entire rural societies in order for them to be participants in the economy, in the improvement of their country and the world. So that is the entire area of expertise I have.
Anya.
Is it working? Hi, my name is Anya. I'm just here for diversity, really. No, kidding. So we've spent the past 4 years studying different data sets, studying student data, labor market data, working on figuring out how to forecast labor market trends. And basically we work with schools in order to bring labor market trends to students and help them build out pathways in the new economy. So I want to look at augmented humanity from a bit of a different angle, from the angle of education, because education is probably the oldest form of augmenting yourself.
Daniel, we know you have an AI company, but your forays into augmented humanity.
Yes, so my company helps organizations.
Could you speak up a bit?
So my company helps organizations operate more effectively, and now what we're seeing are organizations collecting data about their employees to help them operate more effectively, and the next stage to that is then augmenting those humans to enable them to operate more effectively. And so that's why I touch upon this topic.
Valerie.
I'm a medical geneticist from Moscow. We do genetic tests. There are a lot of ethical questions what we can do with genetics, because the easiest answer is to diagnose diseases, but there are some more answers. You can predict some diseases, but you cannot in some cases. You can also predict like an IQ or your ability to do math good. And there are a lot of questions that we can do next with genetics, like gene editing. So there are a lot of questions we can discuss here about augmentation of human genetics.
Jamie, I'm going to try quite hard today. I might fail, but to avoid us going in circles, to avoid every road ending up as it's an ethical question that humanity must decide type of issue. This is the humanity question. This is the humanity equivalent of the drone killing, augmented vehicle, autonomous killing machines. There's no answer at this point. So what did you want to frame the question as again? Remind me how you framed the question.
So the question is, so we know that we humans have already developed and will develop the tools to recreate life on Earth. We've done it through agriculture, and now we're going to be able to do it on the genetic level for all of life, including ourselves. And the question is, what values will guide that process? And I think the inference of the beginning of your question is, how can we build, because if it's everybody gets it, has to be values driven. We have to have norms. Everybody gets it. So I'll make it very concrete, connecting to the issue that you're talking about. Last year, as many of you may know, last year in November, it was announced that the world's first gene-edited CRISPR babies had been born last October in China, created by a very unethical, in my view, Chinese biophysicist. Immediately after that, the World Health Organization created an international advisory committee on human genome editing, and I'm part of it. And so we're meeting in Geneva to try to recommend what this regulatory infrastructure looks like, because it's got to happen quickly. Denis Rebrakov in Russia has announced that he has 5 parents lined up to have genetically engineered babies. So we really have to make this concrete. It can't just be principles.
Okay. And at the same time, we head towards the extremes, don't we? The Superman, the woman, the ability to... But let me start off with a straightforward, practical question. If I was to say to you, you could have a chip put into your hand that had all your passport details that would update as necessary, but would be easier for you to go through passport control, identification, pay your bus fare, would you do it?
No question. It's a convenience. And I am a believer of the fact that, for example...
Yeah?
Yes,
you
I will do it. Yes.
Would you? You would?
Yes, I would.
You would?
Sure.
No way. What's the benefit? I'm willing to do all kinds of interventions, but for a marginal benefit of a passport line?
So in here, hang on, whoa. How many of you, it's only a little chip. Let's face it, your dog has a chip for rabies behind its ear. How many of you would have a chip? It's got basic details, passports, date of birth, color of eyes, blood group. How many would have it installed? How many of you would not on your life have anything even close or remotely close? I would say that's almost 50-50, which is different to the panel. Why would you have it installed?
I spend a lot of time in airports. It's really frustrating.
Good answer.
I've already got a chip. So it's not a chip, it's a ring, and it collects my...
Speak up. I think you might...
This ring collects my temperature, my heart rate, my sleep, my location, and I'm not using this data at the moment, but the idea is in the future it's going to help me make better decisions about my life.
So you're wearing a device that's gathering information upon you, which who controls?
The app company, but I can get access to that data.
Right. So you've given up control of the information about your current blood pressure and your current temperature. Why would you have the app? Why would you have it?
I think the answer is very clear for me. It's definitely convenience and no fear of privacy. Not having privacy because I have my iPhone. They know exactly where I am, so who cares?
So I have 3 passports. So if I could just have one chip, I think it would make my life a lot easier. But really, I think we're not right now, obviously, in a position to make that decision because you want to be much more aware of the details, etc.
So, yes, go ahead.
I would think, why should we use Facebook, for example, to communicate with each other? But like 10 years ago, no one would use your own name and your family name in the internet because you were afraid of something. I think that new technology is all the same. You have the chip, you are a bit afraid of something, but on the other hand, you get some advantage. Why not?
I also think this data doesn't just help me, but it could make other people's lives better.
So if we accept, and perhaps we can accept, that the development towards an augmented humanity is going to be inevitable, it's going to happen, we need to discuss the limitations upon it. Where do you think those limitations naturally lie? Jamie?
I think there are no natural limitations, but that doesn't mean there are no principles that should guide us, and it should be based on a cost-benefit analysis. For this chip, I feel like there's not a big benefit relative to the cost, but there could be things where we're immunizing everybody, we could genetically alter everybody to have some kind of benefit that could be worthwhile, maybe immunity to some kind of deadly pathogen that was wiping out people. So I think that there's no natural limit.
I agree with Jamie that I don't think there's any way with the information flow and the technology to limit any boundaries.
Well, hang on, you say there's no way. Isn't that rather defeatist?
Well, no, it's not defeatism because it's rather accepting the facts as they are. Because right now, we have an over-regulated society anyway. So we're talking about creating more regulation, which will be impossible to deal with.
Hang on. You say there's no way to do this, but you agree you're going to have to put some limitations.
It would be nice to do it ethically, as Jamie mentioned, but I think there's a big difference between ethics and being able to implement limitations.
I think that limits is not the best word to describe what should each of us do or not do, because, for example, about the chip, if you travel a lot, a chip gives some advantage, but if you live in a village and you never leave your village, you do not need any chip. There is no advantage of this chip. And for each of us, the same thing could have advantages and disadvantages. And for you, the advantages could be big, and for me, there are no advantages at all. I'm sure that for each technology, there should be a choice for everyone to select to use this technology or not to use.
Yeah, but that's a cop-out, with respect. That's because what I'm suggesting, what I'm trying to get you to go towards is the development of these technologies that eventually do raise the ethical questions. And the issue surely becomes, do we wait for it to be upon us, or do we proactively look now?
So what I would say is we're using the word limits in two different ways. So what I'm saying is there's no limit to how far humans will eventually go. We will eventually leave this planet, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be regulated. It must be regulated with a cost-benefit analysis in mind. And that's why we need these infrastructures. We don't allow people to do any kind of radical experimentation on themselves or their kids. And it's okay to have this kind of regulatory environment because these technologies are so powerful.
I think a lot of it is also about who sets the rules and who leads the dialogue. Because sitting here today, I think we are in a very privileged position, right? We can't speak for everyone out there. And I think a lot of it, as Jamie and I have talked just before the panel, is that there should be, like a majority of the population should be part of this dialogue. But that's not the case right now because they're not qualified, like a lot of people are not qualified to be part of this dialogue. So a lot of it is about who makes the decisions and who's it in favor of. Because it's one thing kind of selling this idea to the citizens as, you know, we're not going to monitor you, this is not a governmental initiative, this is for your own comfort, but in that case, you should be able to opt out, but will you be able to?
I remember, I'm old enough as indeed maybe one or two other people in the room are, I remember when the first test tube babies were born in the UK. And very quickly, the commission, the Warner Commission, I think it was, came into existence on setting out an entire raft of basically do's and don'ts and ethical principles in relation to that. Do you now fear that the technological advances are happening faster than we could create commissions that would spend 3 years taking evidence and consider the best practices?
Richard, because you look at least 10, 15 years younger than the age you admitted, you're making me think hard. And so you've inspired me to think. On this note, perhaps we should first set the objectives of why we want to do something to augment humanity. Specific things.
But we would each have a different reason.
Well, of course. But if the objectives are not debatable, it makes the job easier.
No, I'm not sure that's true, because your objectives might be societally nondescript or neutral,
right,
but personally positive.
Well, I'm thinking selfishly here. Because my day job is curing cancer, nobody can argue with the fact that I want to alter molecular and cellular mechanisms to cure cancer. That objective is not debatable. How we do it may be debatable, but the objective is not debatable.
I have some examples when some medicine could have disadvantages. For example, the deafness, when you cannot hear. In some cases, it's a genetic disorder. And if a couple is deaf, they could have a baby that can hear or cannot. And there is a very nice research by UK ethic community. They discovered that a lot of couples that are deaf would like to have their baby deaf. And what is good?
Right, so
what
you
is
answer
bad?
the question. Let's all come off the fence here in these situations. You answer the question. The couple who are deaf, who would like to have their baby deaf, when there is technology available to ensure the baby will be here, will have hearing.
That case has already gone to court in the United States, and the deaf parents won. And but it's a real question. That's what I was saying before about regulation. I want to connect it to what you were talking about the UK. What we're talking about is life. And so if parents, let's say they're not deaf parents, let's say parents out of solidarity with deaf people want to genetically engineer their own embryo to be deaf. Should that be legal? Is that child abuse? And there are.
What's your answer?
My answer is that it's child abuse. And we can't pretend that we live in a world of entire relativity. We live in a world where there are norms. Those norms change, and that's the process. That's the reason why we have dialogues like this. That's the reason why we have governments and civil society and political structures, so different people can come together and find compromise. You mentioned Louise Brown, born 41 years ago, and then the Warnock Commission, and then the Human Fertilization Embryology Act. The UK is now the best regulated for genetic technologies and assisted reproduction. UK is the best regulated society in the world. And they have a national health system, and they have some of the best science. So regulation is not the enemy. Regulation can be an enhancer. But unless we move forward together, we're going to rip each other's eyes out. And that's the role for coming together. It's not, we can't have a society in any area where everyone just does what they want.
Right, but I want to come to Anya's point earlier on augmented reality, augmented humanity. It's one and the same thing in a sense with education, because we're all talking about, genetically altering, but when you mean augmented humanity, you're talking about something that the rest of us would, I assume, have thought almost a God-given, which is education.
Yeah, so with education, I think we're reliving a very interesting time, because we were never at a time previously in the history of humankind when we could learn anything, anywhere, anytime. However, that's not really what's happening, right? It's not like everyone is just crazily augmenting themselves with all of the useful content out there, whether offline, online, or whatever. So something that kind of keeps me awake at night is something that we call the guidance gap. And that's basically, I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about today, is whose responsibility is it to keep everyone at a level of awareness of what's happening in the world? So in terms of technology, whose responsibility is it
Why is it anyone's responsibility to keep people aware of what's happening in the world?
Because otherwise we'll end up in a society that is moving forward at a much slower pace, is not utilizing all of the resources that we currently have access to. And also, if we're talking about augmented humanity, we will not reach that kind of we will not be able to take that big leap. And if we talk about, for instance, students in schools and of a school age, then they are not always in a position to be able to kind of go out there and get the information that they need themselves.
You do realize you're opening a complete can of worms here, because
I'm ready for that.
It begs the question, who does it? What information do we consider they should be informed of? Let's bring our old friend China in, that would have a very different view on what information would be given, say, for example, on the current protests of Hong Kong, of awareness in the world.
No, most definitely. And I think it's definitely a discussion. It's definitely a model of kind of checks and balances. Education right now in the US or in Russia or in a lot of other countries and in China is still very much controlled by the government, right? So the government decides how they want to develop their human capital. The government decides how their human capital should then kind of be part of the economy and how they should be integrated into the economy. And the government decides what should be installed and what type of tools should be used in order to increase the return on investment.
Right. I think it's fair to say that with something like education, it's very hard to argue with the outcome, because the outcome is desirable. Of course, it can be distorted like in anything else, but the outcome is desirable. And when it comes to entitlement, individual entitlement, I think it's clear that every individual is entitled to have education. So I agree with Anya in that regard.
But let's talk about your cancer treatments. Let us talk about your cancer treatments. What's the average cost?
Okay, so this is a very, very good question, Richard, because if you look at the way it's being practiced today by particularly big pharmaceutical companies and big biotech companies, the cost is exorbitant. People cannot afford it. Certainly, insurance companies can afford it in America, but as you get away from there, for the rest of the world, it becomes prohibitively expensive. The average cost of the new immunology treatments for cancer is north of $150,000 per course. The average cost of a cellular therapy is north of $400,000 per patient, per treatment cost. However, is that the real cost? Is that the cost that we necessarily have to accept? The answer is no. The answer is no, because a company like mine can deliver these technologies and treatments at a fraction of this cost.
Right, so let's assume that not every company is like yours, and the costs are as they are. Jamie, again, this is technology that has allowed us to have these technologies that in the fullness of time will come down in price. But what do we do in the meantime?
So every technology has its first adopters. The plow had the first person to use the plow. We can't wait until a technology is ready for even distribution. If we did that, we wouldn't have any technologies. On the other hand, we've seen what happens with, for example, when European powers had better guns and better ships than everybody else, and how much devastation that caused. So we have to let technology play out, but we have to do it in a context. And I totally agree with Anya. We have to, we shouldn't be spending too much of our energy limiting technology. We have to do some of it, but we need to do a lot, bringing more and more people into the space where they can benefit from it, whether it's through education or access or subsidies. And I think that's the game in my
How do you do that with limited resources?
So first, it's education. I mean, there's countries that do a great job with educating their publics. There's some, like the United States, that do a terrible job distributing healthcare resources. A country like Israel
hang on, don't
does it,
gloss
and
over
the United
that.
States doesn't.
Don't gloss over that.
Yes.
The US pays more in healthcare than any other country in the last 5 or 6 combined, or whatever it is. Same with education.
Yes.
A Rolls Royce at the top. I was going to say, I won't insult the other vehicle. An Austin Morris of the 1970s at the bottom. That is a scenario that is destined to repeat itself with augmented humanity.
If that's who we are, that's who we will be. But there are some countries that aren't doing that, and we should emulate them.
Such as?
Like Israel is a good example. Switzerland is a good example. The United Kingdom is even a decent example.
Daniel, the role that private sector versus public sector plays in this development of the sort of thing we're hearing here, education, exceptionally expensive healthcare treatment that eventually will come down in price.
I think that this is a theme of the day, which is technology can be used for lots of bad things. It's not until bad things happen do we have to start to regulate them. And I think that we're going to see these technologies being utilized by the private sector first. And where it goes wrong, where, for example, we'll put chips in us because it gives the companies our data, and then suddenly everybody's hacked, that's when we will end up dealing with that.
Should we be proactive on this?
Yes, I think we should.
Should we be, I mean, it's very nice to have panels like these, but you know, what measures should we be taking now to ensure Frankenstein is not developed in 25 years' time?
We should be proactive because, because of decentralization and these technologies, one individual can now make a big difference. One individual, one 16-year-old in their room could hack all of us if we had that chip. And I think that we need to take those considerations into account very seriously.
Valerie, should we be legislating? Should we be regulating now?
I think that there are some countries that have very good regulation for this country, like United Kingdom. And there are other countries that are not as good regulated, for example China, for example Russia. And there are a lot of countries that does not have regulation at all. In some new technology, for example. When we introduce some new idea, like gene editing, we face the limits that we have in our country. For example, we cannot imagine gene editing of a baby in the United States now. We cannot imagine gene edited baby birth in the United Kingdom, but we can in China, for example, and we can maybe in Russia, for example. I think that every scientist all over the world have an access to the information.
But should we allow testing so we know what we shouldn't be doing?
I'm not sure that there is someone who can judge.
Well, someone has to.
Sorry?
Someone has to judge.
I'm not sure that this will happen because, for example, there might be some committees that, for example, says that gene editing for human is not very good, but why should some Chinese scientists follow this recommendation?
The China example was particularly striking, wasn't it? Because it broke just about every rule in the book, and then quite a few more.
Yeah, and because the scientists had organized themselves and they had established principles that they thought would guide the day. And so one of the reasons why I'm so outspoken on this topic is this is exactly what happened in the beginning of the era of genetically modified crops. The scientists got together, they said, this technology is really powerful, we need to self-regulate and establish guidelines. Those guidelines were followed, and that's why today it's completely safe to consume GMOs. There's never been a single study that shows that consuming GMO crops is any less healthy than non-GMO crops. But the public doesn't think that, and that's why you have all this violence around GMOs. And so the scientists were self-organizing around this topic, and that's not enough. We need to go broader. I completely agree. Every country needs to have its own regulatory infrastructure based on international best practices and its unique customs. We have to and we can define red lines beyond which people shouldn't pass. That's a start.
I think you're getting to a very interesting topic on kind of when does regulation and kind of overt regulation start tampering with the levels, the speed of, and the pace of change, right? So the pace of progress. Because at the end of the day, it's undoubtedly so that, okay, so individuals do benefit from augmenting themselves, right? But countries majorly would benefit if they could kind of crack the code and get the most out of their humans, right? So I think the big question for me, for instance, is where do you draw the line? So
Answer your question.
Huh?
Answer your own question.
Okay. So I think we just had an interesting example, I think, last year probably, with the whole AI debate and the kind of new, the big agenda between, you know, China and the US and the US in the AI space. And what was happening in education was, so China was experimenting immensely well with AI in education without any regulation, kind of, and any discussion really on it. So they just went in and started experimenting. Whilst in the US, you obviously, when you're going into a school and you're starting dealing with a new technology, you have to go through a very long turmoil process of piloting for like 1 to 3 years. So I think that there has to be some sort of balance, maybe kind of, I don't know, sandboxes or, I don't know, kind of test grounds where you can experiment. Because unless you can experiment and unless you kind of have the framework and potentially some regulatory discounts, that really can tamper with the speed of progress.
And the speed, this is interesting, and this does take us, Daniel, back to the point we were talking about this morning, about winners and losers, victory or defeat. How important is it, let's put it crudely, the nice countries, however you define that, how important is it the nice countries stay ahead of the bad countries?
It's not even at a country level. Imagine a future where an 18-year-old could use their 3D printer and few other things to build a device that you can looks at somebody and then goes to Facebook and pulls in their data and tells you all of the things you need to know about them. You know about their age, you know about where they go on holiday without them knowing. So it's not at the country level, it's at the individual level that person is now violating potentially the other person's privacy. And how would you even know that person has
why is there a violation of, well, because they may have locked their Facebook account.
Potentially, yeah. So I don't think it's even countries or corporations we need to be thinking about regulating. It's individuals that now have this power over others.
Okay, so you want to, but come on. If I said to you, you can look at somebody with a device and know a certain amount of information that's on their Facebook page, for example, would you do it?
But there's an algorithm, I don't know how true this is, that apparently with 96% probability can predict, knows whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, so can understand your sexual preferences. So should I know your sexual preference before you've disclosed it?
Well, it's been in the newspapers, so I shouldn't worry about that. Right, but what do you think? I mean, we've gone from cancer. What I'm trying to establish here is the vast array, as Jamie starts out, on this augmented humanity issue. Because one seems like a harmless, well, I can work, I now know which bars you like to go to and who you sleep with. The other is I'm going to help you run a mile 5, twice as fast as everybody else. Which is acceptable to you?
I don't think I've decided yet, actually. Right now, I know it's going to be a very interesting few decades, and this is why we're on this panel today, because I don't think anybody actually knows the answers.
They don't. What's acceptable to you?
Richard, you've raised 3 very important questions. One is regulation, one is the role of the government, and the third piece is pricing of these innovations. And the problem I have is that when you regulate, by definition, there'll always be violators. And the impact of the violators is much greater than you can imagine in every field. Now, as far as the government is concerned, overregulation means more government in some ways, and the government's role in things is out of hand already. For example, in the US, you have the spending. Government spending is today 40% of GDP. That's unconscionable. It means that we have to accept inefficiencies in the process. And as far as pricing is concerned, for example, in India today, you can have an open heart surgery for $2,000 per patient, and the outfit will make profits. In the US, the same cost $100,000, and the institution loses money. Now, when you look at the outcomes in terms of success, the difference is not noticeable. So overregulation is problematic.
If we are where we are, I mean, we start from where we are in that sense. We cannot completely repair the US healthcare system. Hillary Clinton tried, and look what happened there. Obama tried, and well, look what happened there. Donald Trump has yet to try. We'll look at what happened there. But we'll leave that to Jamie. This issue, though, of it's cute that I can look at you and I can know what's on your Facebook page because I've got a little device in my ear that tells me I'm about to, or I've got spectacles. But it's not cute that I can genetically change my prospective baby.
Well, no one cares whether it's cute or not cute. This is where our species is going. That's why I was saying we've evolved for almost 4 billion years. We've had this format for a little while. We are going to transition to some other format. It may look like this. It may be different. We may be living in space where this biology doesn't work. So in my view, there's a 100% chance our future is enhanced, augmented, and genetically engineered. And the norms will change about what is and isn't okay. So our committee at the World Health Organization, we have put out a very strong statement saying that it is entirely unethical for anyone to genetically engineer an embryo that is going to be implanted now. In the future, that is very likely not going to be the case. And everyone is pretty much going to agree because they're going to say, wait a second, we can eliminate some deadly genetic disease. Why wouldn't we do that? And so the question is, it's, as I said at the end of my talk, it's not yes or no, it's how best.
If I could give you either a pill or an operation or something that would allow you to see the next iteration of us, of Homo sapien, whether it be in 500, 1,000, you can either go to sleep and wake up,
right,
or you can stay around.
I'm sticking around. I love it here.
You would?
Yeah, of course.
You'd take it?
Oh my goodness. I think and write also a lot about human life extension. And right now, if we were to pool everybody in this audience, what's the kind of the age that you'd like to live? Most audiences, they wind up at around. It's already.
Well,
been done.
Let's find it.
Okay.
So what's the question?
So, right now, if you could live to any age, what's roughly the age? So let's say, all right, so raise your hand if 70 is kind of your target age of how long you'd like to live. Good.
Well,
80, 90, 100, 110, 200, 500.
Unlimited.
It's like an auction. Yeah. So the point is, I'm certainly on the unlimited thing, is it's all set within the context of our expectations. Right now, most polls show the average person thinks, 90 is about right, but it's about right based on our set of possibilities. Those possibilities are going to change, and then it'll be 100, it'll be 110. So I just think that we shouldn't be locked into this format of now, because this is very different from what it was even 100 years ago.
But hang on, that's a truism argument that doesn't advance us in the sense that we have to be concerned with this debate, don't we? What would your age be, Anya? That you would...
I think it really depends on the goals, because I think that's a big question right now, actually. So what for? okay, you know, kind of like long age for the sake of long age, like eternity for the sake of the eternity. And I think I definitely agree with Jamie here that it is very much about our expectations, like the way we plan our lives, the way we even go into education, so I'm coming back to my angle, is very much based on the expectations of life expectancy, kind of that was there, you know, before that, right? So you kind of have this, you go to kindergarten, then you go to school, then you go to work, and then you retire, and that's kind of it. But
that's not
that's
very
kind
promising.
of it, right? Well, yeah, I know, but that's the way we plan our lives right now. And I think that if we're talking about kind of augmenting ourselves to live longer, then all of the processes that are put, such as healthcare, and systems such as education, have to be altered.
Right, but Daniel, Jamie's right when he says earlier, we are already augmenting our lifestyles, humanity. The person who goes in for bowel cancer operation has augmented, versus as much as my mother who took blood pressure tablets when she was in her mid-80s, so she'd last in her late 80s.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when it comes to the age debate, I'd like living and I would want to live forever. But I think it's...
Would you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think you should have a choice when to die. I don't think that we should all automatically live forever. I think it's barbaric that we die the way we do, and we should choose when we want to die.
Whoa.
Okay, bye now.
How many people in here want to choose when they die?
I have a new business right here.
But that's also, hang on, when you say choose when you want to die, are we talking voluntary euthanasia? I've got a terminal illness, I don't want to die a painful death in 6 months' time. Or, do you know something, I'm 65, I'm feeling good, I think it's time to go. Which it is.
It's not that if you're ill that you choose to die. My assumption is that we all live for a very long time. We'll all live very happy lives. But I don't. At some point, maybe you're tired. you want to go. But I think it depends on your goal. My goal is to try to understand humanity, and that's going to take a very long time.
Valerie, you're in the medical field. What do you make of it?
I think that. For life expectancy, for example, it much depends not only on what I want, but it also depends on what the society is and what the quality of my life is, and a lot of other questions that depends on the society in general. If talking about in general gene editing, for example, how would I answer a question if would I like my daughter to be edited or not? I would give two different answers. As a father, I would say no. Why? She's pretty, she's somewhere here. And there is another answer. As a scientist, and I'm rather curious about gene editing, I would say that it would be cool if someone would edit some baby somewhere. It might be in China, in Russia, anywhere else, but I think that gene editing of humans might be good to introduce this technology to medicine.
We are really down on China and Russia. Unfairly?
There's a fantastic book that people should read, not just to adhere to the Chinese philosophy, but understand their culture and state of mind. And it's called The 100-Year Marathon. After you read that, you will get to understand and respect their philosophy. Now, you don't have to adhere to it, but you will respect it. I think China has had a very long history, very long culture, and no matter what, we need to respect that. Regarding Russia, Russia has been in a state
hang on.
Yeah.
Let's not so fast. If if China's standards on these issues are lower, as we would perceive them in, say, OECD Western countries, do we still need to respect it?
Well, I said not adhere to it, but
you said respect it.
Respect their way of thinking. And that doesn't mean, by the way, the government's way of thinking. I'm talking about the culture itself.
Yes, that's all fair and good. But if that cultural thinking leads to a result that we do not find acceptable.
Well, the question is we who? We meaning America, Europe, the so-called civilized world. What about our inappropriate ways of handling things? For example, in the campus that my company is in, there is a neighbor. It's called Lincoln Laboratories. They are operated by MIT under government grant. Their purpose in life is how to perfect killing machines so we can use them in warfare. Now, I must tell you that a few of them came to me and started complaining about the fact that we do mouse experiments. Can you imagine their job is to perfect killing machines, and they're complaining about us doing mouse experiments so that we can cure cancer quicker? Now, that kind of hypocrisy cannot exist. So we can't use double standards. And that's the reason I say I'm not a China lover or any other lover. However, I think we need to be fair.
So yes, also we have someone with a close Russia connection, two people with a close Russia connection. But let me talk about China. And about my home country, the United States. So I'm a very loyal American, the child of a refugee. I certainly believe that there is better and worse in the world, and when we see worse in our own countries, we should condemn it. And when we see bad things in other countries, we should condemn that too. But I do think that we should be worried about particularly China, but also Russia. With Russia, Russia is the most aggressive country on autonomous killer robots, and the United States and China are all involved. And I said in my talk, if you are the United States and you stand down on autonomous killer robots, you're basically standing down on promoting your values. But China is moving very aggressively into these most revolutionary technologies, and the ethical guidelines that are creating the parameters of what is and isn't possible are very, very different. And if we aren't comfortable with that, as I certainly am, as I was saying before, extremely uncomfortable with what He Jiankui did, we need to stand up and we need to fight, because this is about the future of humanity. And I don't think that we can just be relativistic, oh, they do some bad stuff, we do some bad stuff. We should be for good stuff and against bad stuff. And who's we? It's the coalition of whoever it is.
The reason I put it in those terms is because eventually all these things will end up in highfalutin, important committees like yours, where decisions will be taken, where geopolitical issues come into force as well. I'm not suggesting in yours at the moment, but anything under the United Nations has every potential to being a real shit show.
To use a technical term. And that's the case, and that's the context, is this competitive environment, and that's one of the factors that we're racing against.
Valerie.
I think that it's not a matter of China or Russia or the United States, it's more a matter of a family, because there are a lot of ideas inside any family, and if a government make a red line, some families can go below the red line and some above. Even in the United States, there are a lot of Chinese people and Russian people, and they have some own ideas that differs from the general red lines of the United States. There is a big question, where should we make the red line and where we should not, because another example is the birth of male babies. In some countries, a couple would prefer to have a baby boy, but for the society, this would dramatically decrease the population of this country in 20 or 30 years. So where is the limit of the society in general, and where is the choice for a family?
So, you know my opinion. I think all countries are dumb, so not for America, for whatever. But I actually heard recently that in the future what we'll have, I'm going to bring it back to decentralization and augmentation. In the future we'll have an avatar, and maybe that avatar is a chip inside of us, but this avatar understands all about biometrics. They understand whether we're liberal or conservative, and that might change as we get older. And instead of us electing a politician that represents our desires, instead when a new policy is created, instead of us having to understand the policy and having to vote, instead all of our avatars vote. So imagine a planet where all of us are voting on policies, but it's our avatars that are doing it. That for me is a much better representation.
God help us. God help us. Let me ask you finally, and you can range your thoughts on this. Do not feel obliged to be ethically proper. Do not feel obliged to be politically correct. I'm going to allow you I'm giving myself the power of whatever. I'm going to allow you one augmentation in your life. What's it going to be? You can, at a stroke, there is now something that will allow you to be X or Y. What would you want? If I could...
Massive disadvantage here as a first mover. So I think for me...
anything at all?
Anything. For myself or like society?
No, you. Be selfish.
That's tough.
All right, society at all if you want.
I would think probably freedom to make choices about my own augmentation. I think the power of the individual is really shifting towards the individual rather than kind of communities and governments. Can I have one more? Just one more.
Should we give her one more?
Yes. Come on, guys.
Come
on. And another thing, I think I would definitely want probably like a chip that would allow me to download loads of different languages and kind of learn culture through the different languages. I think that'd be cool. It's just kind of like and a magic wand, maybe.
What would you do?
I would immortality.
What?
Immortality.
You want immortality?
He's gone
He's gone for the brass ring. Immortality. Valerie.
I enjoy equity between people, so I would prefer not to change myself. I would like to be me.
No changes?
No changes.
No changes?
No changes.
They're free?
Yeah.
No changes. Wow. Sir?
Mine is an exceedingly selfish wish.
Yes.
All right.
There had to be
I'd
one.
I'd like to have all the physical and mental powers to make the world more civilized and more advanced. That's what I'd like to do.
That's not selfish. I thought you were going to say...
What is sweet?
I thought you were going to say...
Makes me feel good.
I thought you were going to say you wanted all the mental and physical abilities to play golf better. Go on.
The greatest augmentation of all is culture. There's no difference between us and our hunter-gatherer ancestors 12,000 years ago. So I would want to have unlimited health span to contribute to the development of our culture that can provide every other superpower that we can imagine.
None of you want to be stronger. None of you want to be faster.
Boring.
None of you want to play tennis better. None of you want to look like you did 30 years ago.
Well, that's not true, Richard. I said all the physical and mental powers. So that includes
I knew we'd
everything.
get there. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel.
Thank you very much. You've been a terrific moderator.
Monty, back to you. What about me? I tend to the Mary Poppins view. Practically perfect in every way.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard and panel. That was amazing. I think we probably could have gone on for another hour. We're just going to have a couple of minutes break and then we'll be on to the final session of the day. Stay put, don't move. It'll be awesome.
that's essentially what you're going to do. So he's very good.
Кресло немножечко сдвинуть, пошли.
To your question, it's not necessarily that I believe that it will play a big role in the future. It's more like I hope it will play a big role in the future.
Ivo, you wanting to jump in?
Yeah, I think data is indeed a very powerful instrument, but it's also very dangerous. We have all seen what's happening with Facebook, and so if you have a centralized data system, and I think one of the capabilities that blockchain allows you to do is to work with data without necessarily having to give away your data. You have things like, zero-proof knowledge, for example, which is a technique that allows you to make decisions about data without having to have access to the data. I mean, I can ask, for example, in the room, who's the richest person in this room? Now, I can do that by asking everybody how much money you have, right? I don't think that's something that you really would like to see happening. Blockchain and zero-proof knowledge allows you to keep your knowledge, what you have, in your bank account for yourself,
your
but
identity.
allows the system to make and to come to a conclusion based on statistical methods, which require a lot of computing, but it's possible to define who is the richest person in the room here.
I want to open this up to questions from the audience, so just going to be thinking of your questions, and I'll call you up if you have any questions. But just before, I didn't warn you guys I was going to do this, I should have, but I just am curious if you might be willing to share, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your career? Doesn't have to be negative, it may be something that you learned from, an opportunity that you missed, a job at Amazon, stocks, shares in Amazon, a trend that you missed, a hiring mistake, a leadership mistake that you learned from. So I'm just wondering if anybody here can think about one of those big mistakes you made along the way, and so maybe some in the audience will know not to repeat that mistake.
Well, I'll tell you, some of us are old enough to remember the big bubble that happened, the internet bubble that happened in 2000. So I was one of those that benefited and then saw it come all the way down. So I had a startup that got bought at the peak of the bubble. Yeah. We turned down a $1 billion plus cash offer for a $3 billion plus stock offer.
Why did
which
you turn
went
it
to
down?
nothing.
Because you turned it down because you thought you were going to make more money?
Yeah, of course. You get $1 billion in cash from one person and $3 billion in stock from another person. What do you expect, right? Life is good, things are going up.
Yeah.
They continue to go up forever, and you don't realize they're going to come down.
Were you greedy?
Of course we were greedy, right? There's no doubt. There's no doubt we were greedy. So I think the lesson you learn, first of all, is, cash is king, and the second, diversify all the time, right? Don't bet on a single stock any point in time.
Anybody else miss out on $1 billion or so? Any other mistakes that you can share with the team?
Yeah, I can share a different one. Maybe when it was 10 years ago, I was in charge of a project. I would say it was a different company, the company I work today in Ericsson. At that time, we were redefining how the network should be built with certain futuristic technologies, right? That today are becoming reality in how to build network. I will not enter in the technical details. But at that time, I was so convinced that I was right on what I was doing, because that was the right answer to the technical problems that we have, that I would run that project without having in consideration that I will never get the budget, right? And then I mobilized all the organization, and I convinced all the way up to the CEO to say, this is the right thing to do for the company. But I didn't realize that I completely missed the opportunity window. So the conclusion of that is that you have to push for the transformation at the right time If you are very visionary and that you have the right idea for the company, but you completely miss the time window, and then you create a big disaster for the company and for yourself. So be smart and be visionary, but be very careful about the right time for doing the things.
Your biggest mistake was joining this panel?
No. I think one of my biggest mistakes was listening to my parents.
Listening to your parents?
Yeah, that was, I remember I was working in a research organization, and we had developed a chip at that time, some of you will know about, is the emerging standard, which was DOCSIS, which was a standard which now everybody is using. And we had a chip, and we had publicized that at ISSCC, which is the major conference in semiconductor. And at the same conference, there was another chip from UCLA, which was by Henry Samueli, who, as some of you might know, is the founder of Broadcom. I was actually planning to start a startup on that. And my parents convinced me that I had a great job and I shouldn't give it up and I should just continue, in the company where I was.
So your parents weren't risk takers?
You could say that, yes.
Yeah. Is that a generational difference, you think, or cultural? Or?
No, I think it's both. I think it's cultural, generational. I grew up in Belgium where, you basically were going for one of the big companies and you built your career, which is all good, but that was the normal thing you did as a good student and a good engineer.
So is the takeaway, don't listen to your parents, or is the takeaway, take risk?
Take risk.
Take risk.
Take a risk by not listening to your parents,
Yeah, I would answer to this. My biggest mistake was not to listen to my parents, and the typical question would be, well, what did they tell you?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't listen.
That's a good one.
So I actually want to give a real biggest mistake also. We took venture capital, which basically at some point seemed necessary and seemed like a good idea, but it actually turned out not to be, because it made us dependent. And
because why?
It made us dependent.
Made you dependent.
It made us dependent based on that.
But dependent for more money or information or leadership? What type of dependency on your venture capitalists?
All of that.
All of that.
Yeah, so basically we're a fairly independent company otherwise, and we can do what we think is good and ethical. And when we took in venture capital, we were no longer able to do that. We had to do what was expected of us, and some of that wasn't what we wanted.
Is the lesson from that, don't take venture capital, or don't take too much, or don't take it too soon?
I guess since it's inevitable sometimes that would be bad advice. It's just check really as much as you can if you really need it, or if you can basically do it by yourself. And if you really need it, then try to find it from a good source.
Asho, big mistake?
No, my biggest mistake was that I did not start playing tennis from childhood. I missed a lot of years because I realized this is the greatest thing for someone who devote himself or herself to work, maybe 24 hours, 7 days, and you need an escape somewhere that you can be absolutely in different world. Your brain would only deal how you hit your ball in a way that your opponent could not return. This is the greatest thing.
So a healthy escape. A healthy escape from work.
That's how I
sex,
escape.
drugs, or alcohol,
I go to
healthy.
tennis court.
Yeah. Perfect. Are there any questions from the audience? All right, let's go right over here. Cameras, where do you want me? On this side or that side? I'll go this side then. You want to go up here? Yeah, come on up. Name?
Okay, hi. I'm Irina.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the CEO of Mentor Siemens Business. So just, Ashojan, continuing your idea of this tennis stuff. So the question to all of you. Did you manage throughout your career to find a right balance in between life and work? If yes, how? If no, are you doing anything to achieve that? Thank you.
Oh, I love that question.
So my old boss said, you have a choice, more life, less work, or more work, less life.
What did you choose?
But my answer to that question really is around distributing it, right? So you have to, these days, at least for me, work and life are intermixed, right? So you have to, you continue both actually along the way, right? And they're seemingly wherever you are, you're working wherever you are, but at the same time, you're carrying on with what you're doing. And you consciously have to be able to go back and forth between these different environments. And it's up to us to make sure that you don't get completely stressed out and manage that, right? It's more of a management of work and life to kind of the equilibrium point that suits you.
What does your wife say about that? Do you have a wife?
Yeah, my wife would say actually, yeah. I mean, I make it a point, for example, if I, to the extent possible, I might come home by 6:30, have dinner with the kids, and then, start working again in the evening. Okay. Right? So fairly religious about managing time that way.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly answer yes to the question. I have good work-life balance because I've made my hobby my profession, actually. I was lucky enough to have a hobby that actually can easily be turned into a profession.
Yeah, and I'm amazed at how many of the very successful CEOs are actually good at pushing the stop button. Maybe it takes them down their career. And even Steve Jobs, I'm reminded of this, even though it's not work-life balance per se, but when somebody was interviewing Steve Jobs about the iPad, and he said, how long do you let your kids use the iPad? He said, I do not let my kids use the iPad. So I think about how some people in tech really have clear lines sometimes about the balance of tech. One more from Javier, and then I'll take another question.
No, I will build on a similar thing. I don't believe that you can make a work-life separation, and I never met anybody successful at that. Actually, you have to merge your work with your life. If what you do, you love what you do it with passion, and you understand that it has a mission, then you feel fulfilled, right? If you try to balance yourself out and carve out time for this and that, you fail miserably. That is my experience for many years.
Okay, another quick, come on up. It'll be easier for the cameras.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Antranik Vartanyan. I'm the CTO of a startup named Illyria Security. We automate traps to capture hackers. My question is actually very straight. We always talk about the trends in cybersecurity, the trends about mobility, the trends about distribution. My question is, why do CTOs, CIOs, COOs don't use technologies that exist today, which are distributed, which are secure, better operating system, better network stacks, instead of thinking about the future, the quantum computing, the blockchain, etc. I'm always thinking, are the CTOs and CIOs of big companies blinded by the market, that they are not doing the move to the current innovation instead of thinking about the future innovation?
It's a criticism and a question.
At the same time.
I would say you have to skate where the puck is going, right? So that's I think, how you win the game.
Anybody else? So it's not enough, Ivo. It's not enough just to do it because it's today. You have to be on the trend or else you'll be behind.
Maybe one issue, because today we talked a lot about rising of machines, but today not rising of machines, today rising of frameworks and libraries. And one of challenge to choose right frameworks like libraries exactly for now. It's maybe why you not start to use right now, or maybe you don't have right pipeline to approve some proof of concepts or check these frameworks. You need just set up this process in your company, that's all.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Anybody else have a question? You want to come on down? Or come on up, as I should have said. What's your name?
My name is Alan.
Alan, come on up.
Yep. And I'm from Synergy International Systems. So my question is that when you're looking at successful people, you can see that beside the technical and functional knowledge and expertise that they have massive soft skills, right? So communication skills, stakeholder management. And these are the things that will let them to grow to very on the leadership level, like CTOs, CIOs, CEOs, etc. So my question is that how are you enabling your team members to grow in that, basically soft skills?
In soft skills. So how do you foster your teams to continue, if they have soft skills, to make them stronger, or get them if they don't have them? Javier?
I can start. I have a simple recipe. It's trust. I always say to my team, in this room, the less smart person is me, because you are way more capable than me in any of the matters you're dealing. So the first thing is you trust the team, you empower them. And for me, it's a fundamental factor about soft skilling, because in nowadays, the complexity of the technologies that we're dealing with is so massive that you become an orchestrator of complexity rather than a specialist. So it's fundamental to have a team that is really empowered. And then you don't put yourself at the center, because they are the center. The real knowledge and value, it's in your team and the teams of your teams, right? Actually, it's about inverting the pyramid. Traditionally, we work in a pyramid where the most smart people are supposed to be on top. In reality, that pyramid should be inverted, right? Because the real value, the real productivity is on top, right? And that pyramid narrow down to the management. The people that is in the middle should be controlling, no, should be enabling productivity and knowledge, right? And that's at least my way of managing teams.
You know?
It's a perfect answer. I would like to say pretty much exactly the same thing. We're all for decentralization, and so it would be very hypocritical to basically see ourselves as centers. So basically the C in CXO, whatever, basically needs to not be center, but really enable the team to do the work and just basically help where you can.
Perfect. Alan, thank you. And thank you to the audience and to everybody on the panel. Time is up, but thank you very much for sharing your insights with all the team here. So hopefully they'll be up here one day. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. No. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
¿Qué tal?
For example, or like how you can actually reach and kind of deploy those skills both successfully but also ethically?
I think we care about what is going to land with the audience, but we start first with how it lands with us, right? So it's because it's so collaborative, we kind of have this hive mind at Pixar where we really ponder what are universally relatable human elements, right? And so things like fear, emotion. We have a film that involves the Day of the Dead and the afterlife with Coco. We have a film about fulfilling someone's potential, but that's Ratatouille. It's, we pitch it as it's about a rat who wants to cook, but it's not about, the rat is, the character through which we're telling this story, but this is about fulfilling your potential. The Incredibles, this is not a superhero movie, right? It's about a family dynamic. It's about a family transitioning and growing and developing. And obviously, Inside Out, all these films have a lot going on with them. So we think about what are the resonant moments in our lives. Even Toy Story 4, I feel like it's us coming of age as people who worked on Toy Story 25 years ago. And now as we've grown up, those toys are like sort of mirror images of ourselves and where they're going in their lives. So I think I've gone way off your question. the idea that these are relatable ideas to us and the stories that are meaningful to us as storytellers. If we have a diverse group of filmmakers telling heartfelt stories, then we hope they will land with the audience, and then we don't have to research what the audience is going to want, right? We will give them something of the best quality we can, and hope that they love it.
You've mentioned a word which has been bubbling around today, but actually I don't think we've heard nearly enough about, which is the diversity of the team who are building this. I know Pixar's, you've done a lot of work to make the films themselves diverse. Like, how have you done that? How organizationally do you work to make diverse representations possible in what you make? And how important is that to the studio, and how does it change the things that you make?
You know, it's extremely important to the studio, and it also requires a huge effort, because this has been an industry that has been founded, I would say the industry was founded by white men, you know, and so you have a disproportionate number of men in animation, especially, you know, coming through it. Again, I've been at the studio almost 25 years. When I started, there were maybe 2 female animators. You know, now we have far, far more. There were no women story artists back then, and now we have female directors, we have female story artists, but we're not at 50-50 yet, and this is going to take more and more time. What I love about the success of animated movies, not just computer animated, but you know, that animated movies do so well at the box office, you know, traditionally as family films. What I love about that success for our entire industry is that it's, I think it's really sort of jump-started the education system. It used to be, oh, well, if you went to California Institute of the Arts, or you went to exactly this art school, you may get a job in animation. It was a very limited group of people. They all knew each other. You know, it was sort of insular. But now, many, many universities, many schools, you know, junior colleges, community colleges have animation programs, character animation, storyboarding, computer animation, and so it's changed our pipeline. We're able to really get people. So the success of the industry has impacted education, which then builds a new pipeline for us.
Yeah, I mean, that for me is one of the most kind of powerful things that can happen here, is that actually by pioneering a medium in this particular way, you change the narratives that are told about it, but you also create an entirely kind of new set of ways that people can become creators.
Yes, and it's a responsibility we take seriously, because the films reach a lot of people. This is not, you know, my art film I made in my garage by myself, right? This is something, this is popular cinema, right? We're telling these very human stories. They're writ on a very large canvas for a lot of the world to see. You know, I can't walk through an airport without seeing a Cars backpack or a Buzz and Woody something. You know, it's definitely, it's out there. So we have to take the responsibility seriously that if we don't diversify our workforce, our storytelling, you know, we are not reaching our audiences. We're not landing the cultural impact we want to land, right? So that's the job.
And what do you see as like the kind of, if you could picture one kind of big thing that we're going to see differently in the narratives and the films coming down the line, what are you like excited about seeing becoming possible next?
Oh, wow. I think I'm really excited about evolving and new looks. This is where technology, you know, things that we visualize in our minds, we think we're going to make them look great. And then a piece of technology will come on the scene and give us